During the morning hours on Tuesday.
You're looking at the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York City, just a shade away from Times Square in the Big Apple, where in less than 1 minute, National Football League Commissioner Pete Rozelle will step to the podium and kick off the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. Hi, everyone, and welcome to ESPN's 7th consecutive year of coverage of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. I'm George Graham. We're going to be here for the next 8 hours to keep you up to date on what's happening with the NFL Draft of 1986. The first pick in this draft belongs to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And when Commissioner Rozelle steps up in just a couple of seconds to update us on that first pick, the question is, who will they select? The big discussion has been, of course, Bo Jackson, the Heisman Trophy winner of 1986. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for the 5th time in the last 11 years, have the first pick, and the commissioner with that selection.
The 51st annual NFL selection meeting is now in session. First choice, first round, Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
There you see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers table, and as the day progresses, as you can see, there will be no mistaking this. The Buccaneers will make a pick. There will not be a trade. And Paul Zimmerman of Sports Illustrated, who joins us for the 7th consecutive year, there has been a lot of talk about a possible trade, but it appears they're going with Bo Jackson.
Yeah, that was the talk a month ago. Our spies saw Jackson at Gallagher's last night eating fish, so that's kind of suspicious. I mean, fish at Gallagher's, that's like beer at Robert Mondavi's.
The Tampa Bay Bucks and the #1 pick have had a strange relationship. In 77, they could have taken Tony Dorsett. They didn't. In 78, they traded away their pick, which eventually was Earl Campbell. And here is the commissioner.
Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers select first choice on the first round. Running back from Auburn, Bo Jackson.
The Heisman Trophy winner, Bo Jackson from Auburn, and you can hear the crowd here at the Marriott Marquis Hotel. During the course of our coverage for the next 8 hours, Bob Lee and Paul McGuire will be filling us in on these athletes that are selected and their credentials. Let's go to Bob.
Well, George, the big question certainly with Bo Jackson is the football, baseball question. Paul McGuire, we will be, of course, the next 8 hours looking at these players, plugging in into their teams, looking at their college careers, and also looking at the way they are assessed. Bo Jackson's been called the best we have seen in the last number of years, better than Eric Dickerson.
Well, we had an opportunity, ESPN, to do college football and do Bo Jackson since he was a sophomore, Bob, and the guy is just an outstanding football player, and they say he's better than O.J. Simpson was at that time. But I think the funny thing about Bo is he's not committing himself to anything, because the first thing he said, I will not make a decision until June, until the draft of baseball. And the question is, can someone say, okay, Bo, you're going to play baseball, but you're going to play in the majors right away? And I think that would be the biggest decision for him.
We'll be talking more about that baseball-football question throughout the day, but he is the center of attention because of the baseball and the football question, and also because he is the consensus and has been the #1 pick. Pressure in the National Football League. Can he handle it?
Well, I don't let pressure get to me, and besides, once I leave Auburn, what I do after that, it becomes a job, so I'll have to put up with it.
Bo Jackson out of Auburn, the superlatives, Paul McGuire, just come left and right. And there were some questions at one point, and even in Zim's product, SI, a question about his durability, whether he took himself out of games. That's the way Auburn players are coached, though.
You know, doing the games many times we did, and having the opportunity to talk to Pat Dye, it's the option for every single one of his players, Bob, that they have that option. If they feel that they're not 100%, then they're allowed to take themselves out of the ball game. And when he's the only one that knew how good, how well he was during the course of a ball game. And if he wasn't 100%, they had people behind him that weren't that bad.
He showed us in the Cotton Bowl as well that he can catch the football, and we know certainly from watching him all year on ESPN, he certainly can run the football. We will be grading out our players throughout the day on a combination of numbers. Those are the numbers that he racked up on the field, 17 touchdowns this year. And based on a variety of scouting reports, we'll be putting these players into perspective based on a 20-point system. But Bo Jackson, the #1 selection from Tampa Bay, and of course we're waiting now to see what Atlanta does with Houston. Chris Berman is with us, along with Howard Balzer of the Sporting News, and we talked about rating the players. Chris, we've got the big board. We'll see how quickly they fall off that board.
All right, Robert, thank you very much. We are, yes, in front of the big board. It's kind of the way the various teams set up everything in their war room, Howard Balzer. They without regard to position, behind you can see some of the names. We have put together the top 60-odd players. And, of course, Bo Jackson, people are saying maybe Eric Dickerson in the last 20 years, but that's about it for running backs.
I think the one key thing about the board is that you have to separate a lot of times positions, offense and defense. Our board indicates that Tony Casillas is slightly rated better than Bo Jackson, but that's on a combination of defensive things that he would use in the pros as opposed to Bo Jackson. What we don't have on the board, though, is where Bo Jackson rates as a baseball player. And that might end up being more important than where he rates as a football player, because, as been said, he's waiting for June. But I know if I'm the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now, I'm pretty nervous because they really didn't make a tremendous effort before the draft to sign him. And now they know he's going to play the negotiating game to the hilt. And we just have to wait until June to see where things really start getting juicy.
Of course, as the day unfolds, we will be referring to the board, and you can see a little bit how our rating systems work and maybe how teams are trying to use the quote, I'll use it for the first time today, best athlete available, regardless of position. Sometimes they look at that draft board. Bo Jackson was definitely the best athlete available. That's why he's picked by the Bucs. Let's go back to George Grant.
Thank you, Chris. Best athlete available. Bobby Beathard did give that to us yesterday, so we'll see. It's a draw between you and Bobby. ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft will continue after this timeout. The 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft is being brought to you by The Hartford, the insurance people of ITT, and by McDonald's. It's a good time for the great taste of McDonald's.
To Adventures in Insurance. Today we're with a man in the fast food business. What kind of food do you serve, sir?
Toast and thick shakes. I feature white, whole wheat, rye, or pumpernickel, buttered on the near or far side.
You have insurance?
So works. Plus an installment plan that lets me pay premiums monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually without interest charges from the Hartford.
All company with the moose.
It's a stag.
By the way, what kind of thick shakes do you offer?
Prone.
Year after year, you'll like doing business with the Hartford, the insurance people of ITT.
Out on the road, hungry for home, where everything's as good as can be. Where the hot's really hot and the cool's so cool. We're going home with Mickey LT. Stop, stop, bus driver, they're singing our song. Stop, stop, for the best benefits home. It's a good time for the break day. Yeah, yeah. With DLT, you sing our song. McDonald's.
SimCorp Sports and Celebrity Management. The professionals for the professionals. Player representation, financial planning, product endorsement.
The first pick in the draft.
When your number is called, call this number.
Welcome back to ESPN's coverage of the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We are waiting on the second pick of the draft. The Atlanta Falcons, who finished 4-12 last year. It is expected that they will select Tony Casillas. As it stands right now, one of the finest linemen in the country this year. During the course of the day, we'll be checking in with our Sports Look studio. On the West Coast, Roy Firestone is standing by with Mel Kiper.
Okay, George, thank you very much. And you have to get up pretty early in the morning to stay with this ESPN crew, I'll tell you that. As a matter of fact, it's 10 after 5 in the West Coast in the morning. Mel Kiper is standing by with us. We saw, of course, Bo Jackson picked right away. No surprise there, certainly. But one of the top picks in the top 5 that you selected is John Hanna to Alabama. And one of the things that is intriguing is that you said he's failed many physicals early on in the scouting systems,
It
right?
really has, Roy, and that's the problem with as far as Houston was concerned. You know, now they're probably forced to either draft Jim Everett or trade the selection. Of course, they were interested in John Hand at one time. He failed their physical. Of course, now the Indianapolis Colts are sitting there. They traded up to get that selection, hopefully to get Jim Everett. Now they traded for Hogaboom yesterday, swapped second-round selections with Dallas. They're in a position now where they may go for John Hand. Of course, Chuck Long's also a possibility. But I don't know if they realize that Hand has been failing physicals right and left because of a knee injury he sustained at the East-West Shrine game.
Of course, we're going to be talking about a number of the issues involving the NFL draft. We'll also be talking live to a number of players, existing players in the National Football League, including Howie Long of the Los Angeles Raiders, Mike Haynes as well. We'll be talking also about the issues and updating you on what's going on in the West Coast version. Reporting live from Los Angeles, where it's 10 after 5. Back to George in New York. George?
Good morning, and we'll be following the story from the West Coast all day long as we continue our coverage of the '86 draft. Jim, the Atlanta Falcons, Tony Casillas, could be the keynote to a switch of their defensive philosophy this year.
Yeah, he could be, but right now, that pick wasn't announced right away, which means that they're on the phone to somebody. They're probably getting better offers right now than they've gotten for the last month or so. The longer they wait, the closer they are to a trade. I thought they just announced it right away, Casillas, but now it looks like there's some action.
There has been a lot of talk on this whole first round about the possibility of trade. It has not started with the Atlanta Falcons. Most of it started with the third pick in Houston. If it happens now, what kind of an effect would that have on the rest of this round?
Well, Houston loves to be in this driver's seat. I mean, they've played this game before, the wheeling and dealing game. The last time they did it was they let Dickerson go and they let Kurt Warner go, 2 Pro Bowl players. It was a double relief drive shot for the Rams, and they got some good, useful players. But teams help their team, help themselves more by getting that, number 1, 2, 3 player.
Is Tony Casillas the best defensive player in this draft?
That's what all the scouts say. Personally, I like Mike Ruth better. I mean, you'll see our board has Ruth way up high. That's not my doing. And everybody, I'm the only person in the world who likes Mike Ruth better than Tony Casillas, but I love him.
Bob Lee and Paul McGuire, how do you evaluate a player like Tony Casillas?
Well, Casillas, all the notoriety, lost a little bit of time, and we're talking about the evaluation and big board back and forth. And, of course, Atlanta with Casillas, and then Houston. And just talk about Houston just for a second. For those that might think that Houston was finished with quarterbacks, we went longer than that about this one. Just because they traded for Hogaboom doesn't mean that Jim Everett isn't going to go to Indianapolis, I should say, because Hogaboom went to Indy. So Houston might be blowing a little bit of smoke.
I think this has all been a smokescreen by Houston to say, okay, Indy, we want to trade. If you want to trade down to the pick, because you do want Everett, and I think Indianapolis is still going to take Everett if he's there, even though they did get Hogaboom. One of the exciting things for me today, Bob, is going to be the fact that when we sit here and listen to how many people through the course of these last month or so, good friends of Paul Zimmerman, that lied to him, telling them who they were going to pick, and they didn't. And see how good Paul does again this year.
Well, predicting a selection in this draft once you get beyond the top 5 is like trying to find a taxi cab driver in the city that was born in the city. You just really cannot do it. Let's take a look at Tony Casillas and see how he grades out, and take a look at him in action from this past year. 208 tackles and 18 sacks for Casillas, 6'2 and a half, 277 pounds. They say he could be the best defensive tackle, and really a nose man, plays directly over the ball. 19.7, and since we've been rating people on the 20-point system, various categories, a 5-point maximum in each area. He's the highest rated player, Paul, since we've been putting these ratings together. This is our 7th year of covering the draft. So those are the numbers that are certainly reflected in the Atlanta board as they look to make their decision.
Bob, and he's the kind of guy that is a true nose tackle. You know, you mentioned that. He is a true nose tackle. They don't have to move somebody in there. They don't have to worry about developing him at that position. He can play it.
He's perhaps the most highest rated true nose tackle to go this side. And this is a position when they first went to a 3-4. Nose tackle was cannon fodder. Now it's a position that's acquired some finesse to it.
And he's the kind of guy that is going to step in and play. And that's when you pick a #1 draft pick, you want a guy, and at least all the fans think that that's going to happen, and this kind of guy can step right in and play.
Shouldn't be any suspense here. Let's see.
Run for it.
Atlanta Falcons, first choice. Tony Casillas, nose tackle, Oklahoma.
So Casillas.
Houston Oilers.
is the number 2 selection overall in the draft with Atlanta. Now the clock is ticking on Houston. They have 15 minutes to make their move. Whether it will be a trade, whether it will be a selection to be followed by Indianapolis, we will see. Our 7th consecutive year of live coverage of the National Football League draft continues.
Excuse me, is this Doylestown Federal?
Why, yes it is, sir. How can I help you?
Well, you see my mask? I'm a robber. This is a stick-up.
Wow, is this a real robbery?
Yes, this is the real thing, all right.
You know, there's something I've always wanted to ask you guys. Does that stocking mask hurt?
Well, I used to have trouble talking through it.
You're doing fine. I can understand every word you're saying.
Thank you. Now, do you have any money?
Today is your lucky day. Now at Doylestown Federal, we have plenty of money to lend.
I don't think you understand.
Just about any good reason to borrow money is good enough for us. I assume you know about our rates and payment terms.
Maybe you're having trouble hearing me through this mask.
Look, to get your loan, just visit Doylestown Federal's Personal Loan Center at our Cross Keys office.
Okay, but could you at least lend me $1 for gas to get me there?
I don't think that'll be necessary, sir. That nice gentleman over there would be happy to drive you.
Doylestown Federal Savings and Loan, an equal opportunity lender.
What's that you're shaving with?
A Norelco.
Looks terrific.
Well, it is America's leading electric. It's rechargeable, it's guaranteed, and it gives me a fantastic shave.
As close as a blade?
Yep. Feel.
Wow.
It's our patented system that lifts each whisker up and shaves it off blade close.
I love it when you talk high-tech.
What do you think of the Norelco Ladies Rechargeable I gave you?
Terrific. What do you think?
Sensational.
Norelco. We put quality first.
The clock is rolling on the number 3 selection, 13 minutes and counting, just under 13 now for Houston, to be followed by Indianapolis, which was the pick for which they traded with New Orleans. It'll be Houston to pick, then Indy, and then St. Louis. We talked about Paul McGuire, Tony Casillas, and the way that playing right over the ball, the nose position, has acquired some finesse to it with, of course, the needed power, and Casillas does it better than anybody. Might be the best defensive lineman out of Norman and ever, maybe?
Well, just when you take a look at him, he has 2 people on him at all times. There are always 2 blockers, and in that case there were 3 blockers, and Casillas gets in and makes the play. He's the kind of guy that, if a nose tackle, what he must do is make sure that 2 people block him.
19.7 on our 20-point system in the various categories, the highest-rated player ever. So Jackson to Tampa Bay, Casillas to Atlanta. Now we wait to see George Grant what Houston will do and whether we'll have a surprise or a first trade of draft day.
Jim, when you look at the Houston Oilers, they were the next to last defensive team in the league, so they need defense. But can they pass up Jim Everett at this stage? Lad Herzig has really played it down the middle, as he usually does.
Yeah, the defense they needed was a nose guard. That's what they wanted. They wanted Casillas. I think they felt he'd be gone. The defensive end, who would be logical, John Hand or O'Neill, well, he joins the mob. I mean, they've been drafting defensive ends the last few years. Last year, Childress, you know, they've got a bunch. So do they throw him in the hopper to compete with a lot of young players, or do they take the quarterback, who everybody wants to trade for, Jim Everett? Now they're admitting that they made a mistake on Warren Moon. If they try and get rid of him, that's $1 million contract. Somebody's got to pick up on a player who's going to be a reject. And now how's Warren Moon going to feel? It's very complicated. And once again, Houston, in a high pick, has managed to be in a turmoil position.
No less than 8 teams have contacted Houston for this pick. Who would be the most likely teams to work a deal?
I think the Rams, but they'd have to do like a double leapfrog. It's very hard to get from down there to up here. When they got Dickerson, they had to do a double jump, and they did it. Of course, Houston traded 2 Pro Bowl players, then the shot for Dickerson and the shot for Warner. They got veterans, guys who are useful, but, you know, you don't really get rich trading that high pick when they got a franchise player sitting there, if you think somebody is.
Historically, has it paid off, something like that?
No, it hasn't. I mean, Dallas got 2 Tall Jones, Tony Dorsett, and Randy White, the backbone of their team, by trading up. The guys they got rid of, I mean, Craig Morton, Toady Smith, Billy Parks, some guys who are useful, but, you know, not Pro Bowl players. There's never been a Pro Bowl player emerging from guys who were traded for one of those high picks.
Other than a nose tackle, defensively, what would Houston look for?
Defensively, they probably want a linebacker, but they could get one on the second round. Maybe a defensive back, but no, I don't think it's logical to look for defense. The strength of this draft is offense. There are great running backs, good offensive linemen, 2 great quarterbacks. You know, if they don't trade the pick, it'll be offense, but they could trade the pick.
As you can see, their outside and now their inside linebacker staff, from the standpoint of looking at the athletes. If they should take a quarterback, if they take Everett, they've got Warren Moon, they've got Oliver Luck, they could still possibly trade after they take a Jim Everett, couldn't they?
Well, the only time that's been done recently is when Elway's agent, Marvin Demoff, didn't want him to go to the Colts. Now, Everett's agent is Marvin Demoff, and he hasn't said the same thing about the Colts, who looked like they were going to pick him, because Dowhauer is the Colts coach, and he's a good quarterback coach. Cush wasn't. Now, how they'll feel about Everett going to Houston, well, maybe they'll say we won't go, and so they'll have to trade him. I don't know. It gets complicated.
Well, during the course of this day, as we continue to keep you up to date on the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft, we're going to be taking a look at some of the teams that have not done as well in the draft with the premium picks over the years. Chris Berman takes a look back.
Draft in the blue chip rounds or the first and second rounds. Take the AFC East clubs, the Colts and the Bills. The Colts haven't been to the playoffs at all in the 80s, and the Bills have managed to win only 12 games since Chuck Knox shuffled off from Buffalo to the Kingdom. Between them, these two teams have exercised a total of 35 blue chip selections, but have only 3 Pro Bowl players to show for their collective efforts. At the same time, AFC East rivals the Dolphins and the Patriots have utilized a combined total of 28 blue chip choices that have produced 8 Pro Bowl participants in the same 6 drafts. Now, the Colts and the Bills have made their mistakes in bunches. The Colts drafted Art Schlichter and John Elway, only to wind up with Mike Pagel at quarterback. The Bills drafted Jim Kelly and passed up the chance to take Bernie Kosar, and their starting quarterback now is Bruce Matheson.
I think Buffalo's in a great position now to take what they're going to get what they want, which is a receiver or a defensive back.
You know, they can't throw the ball and they can't catch the ball, so they had a shot at Kosar, they passed it up. Had a shot at the best receiver, they passed it up. You know, I don't know how these people think you build a team.
Let's go back to the commissioner.
Has signed quarterback Burt Jones and traded him to Los Angeles for the Rams' first choice in this draft, which is the upcoming choice. 4th pick in the first round, and the Rams' second choice in this draft. So Burt Jones is traded by the Colts to Los Angeles. The Colts now pick on the first round choice of the Rams. Baltimore Colts select in the Rams spot on the first round quarterback Art Schlichter of Ohio State.
The Colts couldn't make up their minds between Schlichter or Jim McMahon until the day of the draft. Owner Bob Irsay thought of Schlichter as the better prospect. It was a gamble that backfired in more ways than one.
All right, on the last pick of the first round, selection by the Buffalo Bills, Booker Moore, running back, Penn State.
I still, you know, James Wilder, I thought of Missouri, here's a guy, what, 6'2", 225, as opposed to Booker Moore, who is 5'10", 205. Now, they've got a fullback, Curtis Brown, that's that same height now.
Picking in place of Denver, Buffalo selects Perry Tuttle, wide receiver, Clemson.
The Bills actually traded up to draft Tuttle ahead of Mike Quick, whom the Eagles were forced to settle for. Tuttle, a teammate of Dwight Clark's at Clemson, was another overdue Bill, while Quick went all the way to the Pro Bowl.
Baltimore selects as the first choice in the draft quarterback John Elway of Stanford. Buffalo selects quarterback Jim Kelly, Miami of Florida.
Of course, neither Elway nor Kelly wound up playing for either team that originally drafted them. Elway has taken the Broncos to the playoffs twice, while Kelly gambled on the USFL in Houston, and along with Herschel Walker will spend this fall marching the Generals down the field. Of course, the fans in Buffalo are wondering when they'll ever get to see Jim Kelly, except here on ESPN. As for the fans in Baltimore, they don't have to worry anymore. It's Indianapolis's problem as they watch their Colts decide at quarterback between the incumbent Mike Pagel or newly acquired Gary Hogeboom.
Of course, when we talk trade, the fact that the Colts picked up Gary Hogeboom yesterday, does that take them out of the sweepstakes for Jim Everett, or you think there's still maybe a possibility that they're interested?
I don't know. I'm trying to get caught up here. I'm writing down Burt Jones.
Oilers select first on the first
You're coming
round.
a little too fast for us.
Let's go to the
Third
commissioner.
on the first round. Quarterback, Purdue, Jim Everett. Next choice is the Indianapolis Colts traded to New Orleans.
Okay, there you have it. So the Houston Oilers have taken Jim Everett. The speculation on a trade, and obviously the discussion went on for the first couple of minutes of their selection time. We should point out again, there are 15 minutes during the course of this first round where the teams will have a chance to select their players. You have 15 minutes on the first round. There's been a change this year. The second round is only 10 minutes. Then after that, each round will be 5 minutes. We are waiting on the Indianapolis Colts selection. We'll be back with ESPN's coverage of the draft after this.
At Everett and which team is looking long. I would say more teams preferred Everett to Long, but there are others that agree with what we have, that Chuck Long is the guy.
It shows how close they are rated together. Really, Long, I think, is the type of guy who could step right in now and play sooner than a Jim Everett. Everett really hasn't been a starter that long in college. He still has to develop some things down the road. That might be a reason that Houston decided to go with him. They have Warren Moon. He's no youngster. He's 30 years old. Yes, he has 2 years left on his contract, but if Everett can come along, then, hey, you got to try to improve your team no matter what you're paying the guys you have now. And I think if you ask 28 personnel guys in the NFL to pick one or the other, half might take Everett, half might take Long.
About Warren Moon, now what do they do with Everett and Moon? Now, I don't know whether they think Everett can step right in and play, but we do know this, that Warren Moon signed that big contract coming down from Canada. A good deal of the money, more than most people think, was up front. So that as far as a trade goes, it's not as if they were to trade Warren Moon, they're not peddling a guy that's earning $1 million a year. It's not going to be as tough. His salary is probably in the $400,000 range.
I don't think Warren Moon's going to be traded. If they've drafted, if they're committed to Jim Everett as their future quarterback, then they will stay with him, Warren Moon will play, and they'll bring Everett along. If they wanted a quarterback who was going to play right away, they might have taken Chuck Long rather than Warren Moon. I think the interesting thing now is with the Colts up, is they made a trade, of course, about 10 days ago to get into position, apparently, to try and draft Jim Everett, never thinking that Houston might do that. Don't be surprised if the Colts turn around and now try to trade back down and maybe recoup that third-round pick, because Chuck Long could be the Boomer Esiason of this draft. If he starts lasting a little bit and teams start going for other positions, he could start lasting longer than people think. But the Colts now are in pretty good position to maybe make a trade, as is St. Louis coming up next.
Maybe very quietly, the guy the Colts wanted all along was John Hand. We will see. Bob Lee, what do you think?
Oh, I think that the Colts certainly are in disarray. They traded up to fourth, ostensibly to get a quarterback. And ostensibly thinking that Everett out of Purdue would put some fannies in the seats at the Hoosier Dome. And he is not available because he has been selected by Houston as the number 3 selection. We're waiting on Indianapolis' selection. But Jim Everett, starting as a backup to Scott Campbell, really came on his junior year. This past year with his 5th year with the Boilermakers. They say, Paul, maybe he's a little bit of a sidearm quarterback, but he was the top man coveted at quarterback.
Big, strong, he can run with the ball. We did this in the Pittsburgh game, and he has a chance for a 2-point play at the last play of the ball game and underthrows the receiver, Bob, in this particular game. It was their first game of the season in Pittsburgh. And the thing about it is that it didn't bother him that much. He comes back and plays so well all year long. He's the kind of guy that if he throws a bad pass, okay, let's get on with it. And you got to love his attitude.
Jim Everett out of Purdue, selected by Houston. You think, is Indy going to turn around and trade back down? I mean, if you run a deal in 17-9 with the arm, the release, the agility, and the ability to read defenses on a 5.0 scale in each category, Jim Everett rates out to his 17.9. And on the big board right now at quarterback, in the quarterback selection, Long is our top-rated quarterback. Everett number 2, but Everett the first selection. Colts going to trade back there? I can't see that.
I don't either. I think because I've been 3 for 3 so far.
With the tough ones so far.
No, I'm telling you. Here's where they take a defensive lineman. They're going to take Hand or Leslie O'Neal, and my choice would be Leslie O'Neal.
Now Howard Balzer touched on the fact that maybe Chuck Long now becomes the Boomer Esiason of this draft, and that players begin being passed over. We'll touch on this as
the commissioner is standing by waiting on the Indianapolis Colts selection. Coach Rod Dowhauer is trying to put together his selection. Here's the commissioner.
The Indianapolis Colts, first choice, first round, John Hand, defensive lineman from Alabama. Next up, St. Louis.
Well, that answers the question as far as the Colts go. Will it be offense or will it be defense? It is John Hand, one of the highest-rated defensive players in the draft. Let's go back to Chris and Bo Jackson now.
All right, George, thank you very much. Bo, which should you play first, baseball or football, or did you both start?
This young man, and currently no doubts with the Colts.
No, you know, they're not questioning. He's the guy that got hurt, Bob, and he's going to be fine, and they're happy with him. There's just no question about that. And John Hand is big and strong, and he can play. He's just a good football player. You take a look, and he's been a starter, since he's a sophomore, a full-time starter. So he has the experience to play 6'7", 275, if that's correct. I would imagine he's down just a tad now because they say he's really been working out.
Terrific closing speed. He had some inconsistencies early in his career, but he grades out to an 18.8. His strength, his quickness, ability against the run and against the pass. So John Hand, number 4 selection. St. Louis is up. They've got 8.5 minutes to go, and then New Orleans. This is the 51st selection, the player meeting of the National Football League. It's so high-tech and computerized. Let's step now back in time. Steve Sable with a look at the very first draft.
Institutions in this country have a way of growing from modest beginnings. The NFL draft is no exception. Now, you might be wondering what Robinson's luggage has to do with the draft. Well, this is the old site of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, and it was here in 1936 that the very first college draft was held. On February 8, 1936, representatives from the 9 NFL franchises gathered in Philadelphia to draft from a list of 90 college athletes. The Bears picked first and took Heisman Trophy winner Jay Berwanger from the University of Chicago. But the economics of the game were different in those days. Can you imagine a Billy Sims or a John Elway telling their team, "Thanks for picking me number 1, but I'm going to quit football and go into the rubber business instead"? Well, that's what Berwanger told the Bears.
I was the first draft choice because that's the first year they had the draft. And I asked George Hallis for $25,000 for 2 years. This was way out of their range. They were paying $100 a game and so forth. And it would have been worthwhile for me to play if I'd have gotten that money. Otherwise, I wanted to go to work and get started in business and wind up doing more or less what I'm doing today.
Berwanger did achieve one form of immortality, however. His likeness became the model for the Heisman Trophy.
And a fine trophy that is. Of course, we've come a long way since those days of the NFL draft, Howard Balzer. The St. Louis Cardinals, a team in the Sporting News' hometown, might they make a trade down? What do you think?
The Cardinals are one of the hardest teams to judge in the NFL. The thing that really got things cooking was 2 weeks ago about when they let it be known that they had Chuck Long in for a workout. So, of course, everyone says, new coach Gene Stallings is unhappy with Neil Lomax. They're going to trade Lomax. They're going to pick Long. I think it was just, again, one of those smoke screens to get other teams to think they were interested in Long so they can trade down, because they could trade from 5 to, let's say, 15 or 20 someplace in the first round, get just as good a player, and save money. And I think that's one of the factors that the Cardinals take into account when they're drafting.
I wonder whether Gene Stallings, being the Cowboy assistant, would do business with the Cowboys. We know the Cowboys just a couple of days ago had Chuck Long in for a final look. But then again, they're in the same division, and it's tough doing business here. The pick is coming up, so rather than ask the question, I guess we ought to wait about 10 seconds and take a look at what the Cardinals are going to do.
They didn't take their whole 15 minutes, which is something of a surprise. They're looking at the name. It might be Joswiak or an offensive lineman.
St. Louis Cardinals, first choice.
Or Leslie O'Neal.
Anthony Bell, linebacker, Michigan State.
They pulled one out of the air. That's the St. Louis Cardinals. And they are looking for linebacking help. Stallings has said they're going to the 3-4 defense away from the 4-3 they played a few years ago for the last few years under Floyd Peters. But Anthony Bell, I don't think he's worthy of the 5th pick in the draft. They probably think they can get him maybe a little cheaper than some other players, but that's a real reach, I think.
So it didn't take long for us to have our first real surprise of the draft. Anthony Bell, 5th pick, going to the Cardinals. George Grant.
Thank you, Chris. The 6th pick will be coming up next. That is the New Orleans Saints. Anthony Bell, your reaction?
Well, my reaction is stunned disbelief. I know that's one of the positions Gene Stallings talked about needing. He's a defensive coach. I thought he'd go defensive line. I thought John Hand, if they were available. He has his pick of the board of running backs. It's a top-heavy running back draft. Top-heavy offensive line draft. No running backs drafted, no offensive lineman draft.
Chris Berman came up with our first best athlete. Paul Zimmerman comes up with our first stunned disbelief of this 1986 draft. We'll be back with more of the draft as we're waiting on...
Here, the big surprise so far in the first round of the NFL draft is Anthony Bell, outside linebacker, Michigan State. A big surprise to Mel Kiper for sure. You had him rated 10th, the 10th best outside linebacker. In fact, you said he is a bit an overachiever, but a bit overrated. In fact, you didn't expect him to go in the first round at all.
No, it did not. And the only logical reason I can see why St. Louis might have chosen a player is because he fills a position of need, outside linebacker. St. Louis is switching from the 4-3 to the 3-4 this year with Gene Stallings, of course, coming in. But basically, I thought Bell would be a third-round choice, and I thought he was even overrated at that point. In fact, I had him rated as probably listed as the most overrated player in the entire draft, mainly because he's 6'3", 230, runs under 4'6", benches 450, has good intelligence. The coaches at Michigan State are touting him to be as good as Carl Banks. No way, in my estimation, or in my opinion. I just don't think he is a great football player. And, of course, to draft a kid this high, you'd have to think he would be. In fact, they could have traded down and still got Anthony Bell. And, you know, Cincinnati, from what I've become aware of lately, had Bell rated as one of their top outside linebackers.
Of course, he could prove us wrong. That's very important.
Well, it could happen, but basically, like I say, they could have traded down and still got Bell. And with other players on the board of top quality, I don't know how you could reach for a kid who probably would have been a second or third round draft choice.
All right, let's discuss for a few moments the issue of need. Houston obviously, or it doesn't seem like, they need a quarterback as their first pick. They pick up Jim Everett. The possibility still exists that they could make a trade, and you think the Raiders could be involved with that trade?
Well, in previous years, everybody in the world thought the Raiders had a quarterback problem, except the Raiders. This year, I think they know that they have a quarterback problem. Plunk is coming off the injury. He's at the end of his career. He's a question mark. Rusty Hilger, their sixth-round pick, inexperienced, untested. You can't go into the season with Rusty Hilger. Of course, Mark Wilson's still there, and there were rumors about a trade. I would expect a possibility here to be that either Moon or Everett would go to the Raiders. Now, not necessarily today or tomorrow, just like the Colts when they drafted Elway, traded him several weeks later.
Right.
It may happen here. I'm sure the Raiders are now talking with Houston about a possibility of acquiring Warren Moon.
One other variable I do want to mention, in the scouting system, the issue of drug testing is something like 57 players tested positive. Out of a possible close to 400 players tested positive for drugs. How many of those drugs were the so-called dangerous drugs like cocaine?
Only 3 players were tested positive for cocaine, one of which was a late-round choice. There's only really 2 players affected. And, of course, they will be affected, probably drop down significantly in this draft. The other players, I don't think it will affect at all. I'll monitor that, and I'll check with you, as the draft progresses and let you know how those players are going. I won't mention names, but I'll give you an idea as to if the draft has been affected at all by that testing. I don't think it will be. We're looking for football players, not choir boys.
The other issue, of course, is only 57 players out of a possible almost 400, as I said before. The other thing I do want to mention is that the other drugs involved, marijuana, which is, depending upon how you look at it, may or may not be a dangerous drug, and morphine tested positive, but that was because of previous surgery with a couple of other players.
Exactly. Recent surgery tested positive for morphine. That's why I think the list at 57 was blown way out of proportion. And only 54 were, like you say, for the marijuana. Not a serious, even though nobody condones drug use. But 54 out of 57 were for marijuana, only 3 for cocaine, and the 2 players will definitely be affected. There's no doubt about that.
Obviously, the Colts were looking for Jimmy Everett, Purdue, hometown boy essentially, backyard boy. They didn't get him. They didn't go with Chuck Long. Obviously, there was a big disappointment. It would seem like that they didn't get Everett, right?
I would hope so, in Indianapolis, because of the fact that they traded up with the intention of getting Everett. He's Rod Dowhauer's kind of quarterback. He has that mobility and that athletic ability to move that pocket. He has that strong arm. Of course, the Chuck Long's more of a control-type passer. He's better to go to a team that uses an offense similar to the 49ers. Where he'll slide to, it's interesting. Minnesota still may be able to get him, and they had talked trade earlier in the week. So they can sit right where they are and still probably be able to get a Chuck Long.
Okay. Mel Kiper, thank you very much. We're going to go back to New York now and George Grant. George?
Could those please be returned? Thank you very much, Roy and Mel. We are waiting on the New Orleans Saints selection, their first selection in the first round of this National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We're looking in on the Saints right now and trying to find out what they are going to do. During the course of this day, we're also going to...
No, these are the other 2. There are 4 that we feel, not knowing how everyone was going in front of us, we had to consider up to 4, knowing that probably at least 2 of them, or 3 of them might be not there based on projections. And as it turns out, there are a couple of them that we can talk to. Yes.
Head football
Oh, really?
Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, right.
Where are they?
right behind
Okay.
us.
Right next.
Why would they move? Because we could trade it to somebody else.
The Chiefs in their selection process, and we certainly, with gratitude, appreciate Coach Makovic and the rest of the Kansas City organization for allowing us to eavesdrop a little bit on what's happening in this 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We're waiting on the Saints and their selection. Jim Mora, the new coach, may go in a new direction. That'll be up next. Will it be Dombrowski? Will it be Anderson? We'll find out when we return to ESPN's coverage.
I remember too many people saying that was a bad trade.
New Orleans
Let's go to the
Saints.
commissioner.
Selection on the first round, Jim Dombrowski, offensive tackle, Virginia. Next up, Kansas City Chiefs.
All right. Jim Dombrowski, the offensive tackle from Virginia, is the selection of the New Orleans Saints. And this, the first round of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We are waiting on the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's go to Bob Lee and Paul McGuire.
Well, the new regime has made their selection, and Dombrowski, a defensive tackle from Virginia. Now Kansas City is up, and we'll see that war room will be heating up just a little bit. Well, New Orleans really has to set a tone. They've got to make a difference with this new regime. They've got to get out. They have never had a winning season, and Finks, as Zim said, likes the offensive lineman, so he's going for the beef.
Just remember one thing. Right. Dombrowski is from Buffalo, New York. You understand that?
I understand
He's a player. He is a player. And I showed you before that I wrote down it'll be Dombrowski, or I think the selection, if it would have been an offensive running back, would have been Gary James at LSU. But it is Dombrowski, and he is a fabulous football player. And the thing that may be questionable about Dombrowski, how long is he really going to play? Because here's a man that's going into medical school. He's decided to do that. And that might have, taken some thought, and that's why they waited so long.
He already has his bachelor's degree because he was a graduate student. Well, Dombrowski, the selection of New Orleans. Let's get a few thoughts from him looking ahead towards his pro career.
I'd say right now is pass protection, because at Virginia we're a run-oriented offense, and I'd say we run 60–70% of the time, so I just haven't pass protected as much as somebody, let's say, who went to BYU. So, but that'll come with practice, so.
Jim Dombrowski, he's from Buffalo, Paul. He's probably the highest drafted player who was a hockey goalie in high school. This man's played ice hockey, but he's going on to med school possibly. Already has his bachelor's degree, wants to be an orthopedic surgeon. Outstanding footwork for this young man who is 300 pounds.
He's an excellent pass blocker. He is not, I don't think, the best drive blocker in college football. I think the best drive blocker in college football would be Doug Williams at Texas A&M. But as a pass blocker, he is excellent.
Dombrowski from Virginia, the All-American, 5'2" speed at just about 300 pounds, the number 6 selection overall at 6'5", 296 pounds. So he is the number 6 selection overall, and we'll mention it again to make everybody all happy in your hometown. Out of Buffalo, grades out to an 18-2. His best grades on the pass, the run, and the quickness, knocked him down a little bit on his strength. Where are the trades we have been expecting so far, Paul McGuire? Trade. We haven't seen. We saw one yesterday for Hogaboom. Indianapolis did not trade back down. New Orleans, this is the position they selected Dombrowski, having traded down to 6th. Nobody's made a deal yet.
Well, there are only a couple other teams that really want to trade. The trades now want to be down.
Right.
Not up, which I think is interesting. But, we're looking at Kansas City. Kansas City is a team that's going to, first of all, defense. We're looking at defense. And but all those running backs are there. And this is where they may take another running back, even though they had the first selection last year as a running back.
Oh, we checked in the Kansas City War Room. We'll be back there from time to time. They are the next selection. They have 11.5 minutes to go. We are early in round 1. KC to be followed by Minnesota, then Pittsburgh. We'll return to the Marriott Marquis in New York after this.
Teams thinking they might get a good one in the second round now start saying, oh, we better take one now. And this again leads to that Chuck Long situation in terms of who knows where he's going to end up. Minnesota possibility, but you never know when he's going to start sailing. But Renster, to me, getting back to that, he's going to be a guy I think is going to develop into the best offensive lineman in this draft.
Of course, you're talking about trades, and the Chiefs may be trading right now. We will find out in about 8 minutes. There was a question that they might peddle Bill Kenny. Now, they could pick Chuck Long. Of course, they also have Blackledge sitting right there, so maybe long won't be a factor for the Kansas City Chiefs, but there was rumor that Kenny might go. Of course, he's damaged goods a little bit. He had a bad back last year.
Yeah, he had a lot of injuries last year. There was a rumor about him being traded to Buffalo for Joe Cribbs. We could see a lot of these trades start to develop later in the draft when teams have picked their players, and now maybe a team that was considering a running back doesn't get one, and they say, well, we might be interested in Joe Cribbs. The Chiefs, I think, are in a quandary right now because they liked Hand very much. I don't know if they have Leslie O'Neal rated that highly. I think they might be looking at offensive line, but I think what they're saying right now is we can get just as good a player if we draft down a little more. But, of course, other teams know that, and they're not going to give them what the Chiefs want. So I think they might surprise a little and go for the offensive lineman if they don't make the trade.
We haven't seen those trades of positions yet because maybe when the offensive linemen start to go, the teams at the bottom that want them, like the Jets, etc., may make some trades. Let's go back to George Grant.
Let's pick up on that discussion. You talk about the running back situation with Kansas City. Horton and Hurd, they still are missing one part of that puzzle to put together a strong running back field.
Well, you have a running back core with no runner who averaged 4 yards a crack, and I remember we went long statistical periods with nobody hitting 100 yards for them. Of course, there's an offensive line problem.
So what he can do for their community. And I guarantee you that you're going to see the ones that are in drugs that they know about, that are projected as #1 draft picks, will not be taken.
We have to make the statement up front. There will be players certainly that are passed over. At no time are we going to correlate specific players with the existence of that list. We are not going to do that. But the point is that is going to be a factor. Let's check into the Kansas City draft room. There could be something in the works. Let's eavesdrop now and see what's happening with 40 seconds to go.
Next year. Offensive tackle, West Virginia.
Joziwiak. First name Brian, B-R-I-A-N. Offensive tackle, West Virginia University.
Take it up.
Got it. All right.
City, Joziwiak selected, whose agent at one time had threatened to take him off and want to be a pro wrestler.
Bobby, here's the thing that Paul said, Howard said, I think we all said, that once one of the offensive linemen falls, if he falls early, then they're all going to start to fall. And you're going to see an awful lot of offensive linemen taken in this first round.
You heard the word from Kansas City to the representatives here at the KC table. And now you'll hear it officially from the commissioner.
Kansas City, first choice, Brian Joziwiak. Offensive tackle, West Virginia. Next up, Minnesota Vikings.
Joziwiak, the #7 selection overall. George?
Thank you, Bob. We are waiting now on the Minnesota Vikings, and after that, the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is the first round of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. The Vikings could go for that defensive player, Leslie O'Neal, and will the Pittsburgh take a chance on Byers? That's coming up next. Takes a look back at the draft.
Pittsburgh selects Lewis Lips, wide receiver, Southern Mississippi.
The Steelers proved to be right on target with their first-round selection of Lips 2 years ago. The mercurial receiver made it 2 for 2 in Pro Bowls, but unfortunately Lips is the lone diamond in a solitaire Pro Bowl setting as the club's once golden touch in the blue chip rounds has rusted away. The Steelers have exercised 13 blue chip selections in the last 6 years. That's rounds 1 and 2, but have only 4 starters to show for them. One of them, Lewis Lips, is the only Pro Bowl player they've come up with in the blue chip rounds. Now, if you want to take a closer look and figure out why the Steelers' 6-year absence from the Super Bowl has come about after going 4-0 in the 70s, you would have to look no further than these graphic comparisons. While the Steelers have had moderate success in the opening round, they've come up empty in the second round. How empty? Well, the Steelers don't have a single starter to show for their 7 picks. And look at these mistakes. 4 of their second-round selections are no longer with the team. The lack of success in the blue chip rounds of the 80s is shocking compared to the incredible dividends of the first 2 rounds from 1970 to 1975's drafts. No team has ever enjoyed such blue chip success. Counting Frank Lewis and Dave Brown, both of whom attained Pro Bowl status after leaving Pittsburgh, the Steelers produced a total of 9 Pro Bowl players out of 12 selections in the first 2 rounds of the draft from 1970 through 1975. That, of course, was 10 years ago when the Steelers were a dynasty. Now we are halfway through the 80s. They only have 1 Pro Bowl player to show for their blue chip picks. That is Lewis Lips.
Of course, they have selected some running backs. In '82, they picked Walter Abercrombie, who certainly fits into their running plans right now. But the question is, and some people, some insiders have said they feel Chuck Noll may take a chance on a running back like Keith Byers when we head towards their selection in the draft, which will come after the Minnesota Vikings. New coach Jerry Burns and the Brain Trust at Minnesota is deciding now what to go. Will it be Leslie O'Neal?
Well, you know, Howard, I think, said a very astute thing before when he said Chuck Long is the boomer Esiason, drop, drop, drop. You know, every time a pick comes up from now on, we're going to say, well, it could be Long and somebody else. This has happened from year to year. Eddie Brown last year, he kept dropping. Nobody knew why. Turned out to be a terrific pro. One year, Sean Farrell, Hunter from Notre Dame one year. The sad thing in this climate is with that drug testing and you know, the names, the 57 people, every time a guy goes lower than he should, people are going to speculate, well, is it a drug thing and everything? And a lot of clean kids are going to get burned. That's the sad thing about this.
This is true in baseball. It was true in basketball, too. With the drug situation, those that aren't tainted become tainted just by association.
Well, I think next year the NFL is going to release names of the ones who are clean.
Paul Zimmerman, who is from Sports Illustrated, and he is clean. We believe he is, Bob Lee.
And I'm working with Mr. Clean as well. And we talked earlier about the entire drug situation. Let's step back, take a look at Kansas City selection of Brian Joswiak, who is a concerned and involved citizen involved with the Easter Seals and March of Dimes. You're talking about a guy who wants to work in your community. Kansas City has a good one in that regard, and they've got a guy who is 300 pounds, 6'5", out of West Virginia. Had a hip pointer problem this year. Began college on the defensive side of the ball, and then came over to the offensive side.
You just see where he took that defensive end. Just watch the drive blocking on Joswiak. If you can't move him out of there, he's going to fall on people. He's just big and strong.
He was 309 pounds at the combine workout, so I guess doesn't worry anyone with his weight the way Perry worried everybody last year, but a consensus All-American with 5'9" speed. We grade him on the strength, the quickness, the run, and the pass. Again, your perfect player is a 20.0, and the strength, the top selection, the top number for Brian Joswiak. You said you were with him at a dinner recently, and so he's got his own zip code. We know that he's that large.
I think he has. Here's a guy that has to go to a car wash to get clean because he can't get his hands together to do his face. No, he can't. He's that big. You know, they just hook a chain onto his lip and drag him through the wash. It's the easiest way. He is absolutely huge. You can show a double feature movie on this guy's back. He's just an incredible and that nice of a guy. He really and truly is. He's going to fit in very well out there.
Number 7 selection overall. You better say that. All right. Well, we've got about 5 analogies about how large Brian is. He's the number 7 pick. Minnesota's got just under 8 minutes to go for their pick. Will it be a quarterback? We'll see in just a second.
This will really set the tone for the next 3 picks because Pittsburgh comes up next. They've said, and of course that doesn't mean anything sometimes. I've always said the personnel guys, when they talk to us, they only tell us what they want us to know or what they want other teams to think they're going to do. But Pittsburgh has said they'll go for Keith Byers if no one has taken him. I agree with Paul. If I was a team, I'd be awful hesitant about taking Keith Byers on a team that plays on artificial turf. But if Byers lasts past Pittsburgh, then you have Philadelphia sitting there. I think the 49ers are a candidate to trade into Philadelphia's spot. They've talked a lot about Matt Cavanaugh in recent weeks. Buddy Ryan has been talking about a guy named Anthony Toney, who he could get probably in the 2nd or the 3rd round. He doesn't have to spend a 10th pick. So I think you might see one of your first trades with Philadelphia if Byers is still available.
I don't know that the Byers is the guy that the 49ers might be interested in. I think they might be more interested in Gary James. That's just my opinion. As for Minnesota coming up and then Pittsburgh, as far as Pittsburgh goes with Byers, Chuck Noll is not on the hot seat. He's not going to lose his job if the Steelers don't win next year. They can't afford to wait a year for Byers just because of Noll's situation. The next 3 picks, Minnesota, about 3 minutes and 50 seconds left for their pick, and then Pittsburgh, and then Philadelphia. Let's go back to George Grant.
You talk about shrewd people in the draft, Chris. You mentioned Bill Walsh, and usually on draft day, as we found year in and year out, Walsh usually comes up with something, some big story. If it's a Russ Francis trade, if it's a Wendell Tyler trade, something usually comes up with the San Francisco 49ers. We'll see if that develops on this draft day. When we mentioned Brian Joswiak, and I know when I was with him at the Walter Camp All-American banquet, he was an All-American selected by them, we talked about, among other things, the United States Football League. And I asked him, is the USFL an alternative for you in 1986? He said, no, it wasn't. I want to play in the NFL. And of a couple of dozen of these top players that I talked to since the end of the season, it was echoed almost one after another. They do not regard the USFL as the alternative that it has been over the last couple of years.
Well, I guess they don't like money then. I mean, any kid who's trying to get a decent contract better say, as a matter of reflex, well, I've had some pretty good offers. You know, the only thing that gets the price up in this business is competition. Of course, you know, they're a league with a lawsuit and nothing much else right now. But, I mean, certainly, just to flat out say, no, I don't want them, you know, you're just knocking your price down. You know, you got to play a little bit of a negotiating game. The only veteran that I heard was, you know, seriously talking about it was Stump Mitchell, the Cardinals. But, you know, the league is going to wait to see how their lawsuit comes out and then decide whether they play. That's not a lot to stake your hopes on.
Let's talk about Bo Jackson, too. When you talk about running backs, Bo Jackson is the draft rights of Birmingham in the United States Football League. Some people are saying, look, even if the league doesn't make it, take the money up front from Birmingham and then wait. Now, whether the league makes it is something else. If they do win the suit, then they probably will make it.
You know, they're not exactly stupid over there. At least a few people aren't. If they're going to pay him a lot of money, they're going to lock him into a personal service. I mean, they'll have him driving a car or something. You don't see Herschel Walker buying out his contract or Kelly. I mean, they hold on to those super guys as long as they can. So if they would sign him, you know, through some weird circumstance, they'd have him pretty well locked in.
The Minnesota Vikings, we're waiting on their selection. Let's take a look at their quarterback depth chart. We talked about the possibility of the Vikings going the route of the quarterback. Here's Tommy Kramer, their starter. But as you can see, the 10-year veteran, when you look ahead, they need a quarterback of the future. Is Bono the quarterback of the future? Is Wayne Wilson the quarterback of the future?
I think they're going to trade. The reason I say that is Paul McGuire just said so.
Offensively, too, when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, you talk their quarterback, but you also talk of their offensive line. Sacks a problem in 1985, and they want to shore it up. They really have, over the years, they've been looking for the big stud, that the Ron Yeri mold that they had years ago.
Yeah, when I talked to Mike Glenn, I don't know, a week and a half ago, he said trade down or offensive line. He liked Joe Zwiak very much. He would probably have to like Rienstra. But now Long is there. He didn't say anything about Long. Since then, teams have told me that he's trying to trade up to get Long, unless that was some sort of a smoke show. You know, they play these games, these negotiating games, you can get a headache from it. Long seems logical. Offensive line seems logical. Trade down seems logical because they've done that so many years. There's so much logic here that I'm going crazy.
We're waiting on the selection of the Minnesota Vikings. This is the first pick. After the Vikings will come the Pittsburgh Steelers and then the Philadelphia Eagles, remember, with their new coach, Buddy Ryan. So very easily there could be some further activity coming up. Trade possibility, they've talked about the possibility of San Diego being involved in a trade. As the clock winds down, let's go to the commissioner. That's Jan Van Duzer with him. Here's Jan Van Duzer.
San Diego and Minnesota have completed a trade. San Diego has made a selection. San Diego has traded Green Bay's first-round selection in this draft and San Diego's second in this draft to Minnesota for Minnesota's first and third in this draft.
San Diego selects defensive end Leslie O'Neal from Oklahoma State. Next up, Pittsburgh.
Okay, there you have it. The commissioner announcing that Leslie O'Neal has been selected by the San Diego Chargers in a trade with Minnesota. So again, the selection goes to San Diego. Surprise?
Yeah, it's no surprise at all. I mean, Mike Lynn said that a week and a half ago. The surprise was that the word was that he might trade up. You know, from Houston. Houston swore that he talked to him about trading up. Now, presumably it was, I don't know, maybe it was for Everett. Trading down is their history. You know, they save money that way. They figure, well, one player is pretty much like another. You know, it's kind of a defeatist type philosophy.
What will Leslie O'Neal do for the San Diego Chargers? We'll investigate that when ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1986 NFL Draft will continue. When we're back, we'll go to Sports Look and Roy Firestone.
The AMA has accepted hypnosis since 1958. Mr. Charles Ward, a certified hypnotherapist with 12 years of clinical therapeutic experience.
Stop smoking, lose weight, develop to your utmost potential. You possess the most powerful tool required to break your bad habits. I want you to say, I like myself, stop smoking, lose weight, develop to your utmost potential with hypnosis.
We'll meet you in the comfort and convenience of your own home. Call now, 322-8365.
Catch the action.
emotion, tension, and triumph at the $450,000 McDonald's Championship. Watch world champions like Jan Stevenson, Alice Miller, and Beth Daniel compete to win at the White Manor Country Club June 4th through the 8th. Share the excitement while the pros play and the kids win. Net proceeds benefit Ronald McDonald Children's Charities, including Ronald McDonald Houses, making a tough course easier for kids. So come join the winners at the McDonald's Championship.
Roy Firestone here from Los Angeles with Mel Kiper. You just heard a few moments ago that Leslie O'Neal went to the San Diego Chargers out of Oklahoma State, a defensive end, 6'3", 245. Mel Kiper, of course, with his draft prospectus. We were discussing before about Leslie O'Neal, the fact that he is somewhat small for his position, the Chargers not thinking that's too much of a liability.
No, they're really not, Roy. They really liked Leslie O'Neal, and of course, Minnesota was in a position where they could trade down. Of course, Chuck Long's still there, Rainstra's still there, Neil Anderson's still there. They're in a position where they picked up a third-round choice. A good move for the Vikings, a great move for San Diego. Of course, you know, people think after Hand, O'Neal, Casillas, it's a major drop-off as far as defensive linemen are concerned. That's just not the case. There's a player at Notre Dame, Eric Dorsey.
You love Eric Dorsey.
Well, he's got as much physical ability as any defensive lineman in this draft, including John Hand. He's 6'4", he's up to 285. He's been clocked this week at 4'7", 4'7", which is an outstanding time for a 285-pounder. He's a strong kid, 425 bench press. He was playing out of position at nose tackle, and we talk about Jerry Faust. During his regime, he recruited good football players. Every year they had the top recruiting class, but oftentimes they were played out of position. Eric Dorsey was one of the players that I'm referring to in this case. He worked at nose tackle, moved to end this year after the first 3 games. He finished the year at defensive end playing as well as anybody in the country, and he will be an outstanding first-round pick for a team looking for a defensive end, particularly maybe the New York Giants or the Cincinnati Bengals.
Of course, you always know that they're pretty bright kids coming out of Notre Dame, too.
That's right.
Let's talk about the Keith Byers theory that Paul Zimmerman alluded to a few moments ago. Before we do that, let's go to a draft pick coming up. There's Pete.
Next up, Philadelphia Eagles.
Back at the Marriott Marquis Hotel Ballroom, Commissioner Pete Rozelle has just selected the Pittsburgh Steelers selection here in the first round. John Renstra, a guard from Temple, selected by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they did not select Keith Byers at all. Let's go back out to Roy Firestone, and we'll update you on the next selection, the Philadelphia Eagles, when we return.
Okay, we just caught the tail end of that. We were talking a few moments ago about Keith Byers and the theory that he should play perhaps on regular grass as opposed to artificial surface because of his injured foot, when in fact it really is a little toe, not a foot, a little toe injury. You said something interesting, that Rocky Bleier played all those years for the Steelers with no toe at all. He had it blown off in Vietnam.
Exactly, and had a great career. Of course, Jack Lambert had the big toe injury, which is responsible for your balance. And of course, it ended his career. You mentioned, Zim made a good point about the grass. Of course, the San Francisco 49ers are sitting down there midway through the first round and, you know, have a chance to get a Keith Byers possibly. You know, as far as Pittsburgh selection, I haven't gotten a word on as to who they took yet.
Yeah.
But basically, Keith Byers would be a good choice for a team down in that point in the first round.
Yeah, we were a little bit in the dark, folks. We just now caught the tail end of that Pittsburgh draft. Perhaps in a few seconds we'll get the information passed along to us. Before we do that, I also want to mention the Bo Jackson issue of the baseball player as opposed to the football player. Yesterday on our Sports Look program, we had Sid Thrift, the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates, said that he would not take Bo Jackson. Of course, they have the #1 pick in the amateur draft, would not take Bo Jackson #1. In fact, he says they cannot compete economically with professional football, which is unusual because baseball players make more money than football players. But most importantly, he said that it is a lot harder to hit a curve than to hit a hole in football. And he thinks that he would just be a good prospect, but not necessarily a great prospect for baseball.
That's exactly right. And he'll be an immediate impact player for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The team is in a good warm weather climate, plays on a grass surface. They have a great back in Wilder, who will move over to fullback, a good young quarterback in Steve Young, an improving line, a wide receiver like House, and of course a tight end like Giles. That team could make an immediate elevation up the ladder in that Central Division, maybe contending for the divisional title within the next 2 to 3 years, with the addition of Bo Jackson, plus the other choices that they have in this draft. Of course, Pittsburgh took John Reinstra. I just got word of that.
We just did get word.
And of course, that's their kind of lineman. Strong kid, can come in there and play immediately, and is that great drive blocker, which they like.
One of the things I also want to mention is there are 3 players already in the first 10 picks that are over 300 pounds. The big boys are back in the NFL. We'll come back with more of our live coverage of the NFL Draft on ESPN. Coming back right after this.
first round selection. Running back, Iowa State, Keith Byers. Next up, Cincinnati Bengals.
That's the 10th selection in round one. The Bengals are up next to be followed by Detroit, but someone has put some chips there out on the table. They're not playing red or black. They're playing a specific number here in this roulette game with Keith Byers. So the Eagles have gone for Keith Byers. They needed some more help there. Just to backtrack and update you where we have been. San Diego and Minnesota working a trade in the number 8 spot in the first round. San Diego with that trade, trading first-round positions with Minnesota. There's more to that trade we'll tell you about in a second. Leslie O'Neal selected, the defensive end out of Oklahoma State, outstanding performer. And you had a chance several times to see him in person this year, Paul McGuire.
He is so quick, and you know it really is tough to block him. Not only is he quick, but look at the strength of Leslie O'Neal. This is against Nebraska, and he can stand at the line of scrimmage or pass rush.
Better pass rushing against the line, would you think?
Much better pass rusher, but you watch how he closes down the line of scrimmage. He's got excellent pursuit. I guess that's the expression, nose for the ball.
Yeah.
He has it.
The statistics at 245 pounds, and there's a feeling perhaps you could add maybe another 15 or 17 pounds to that frame and carry it into the pros.
Yeah, and I don't, and you don't know if they're thinking linebacker for this guy, but he's the kind of guy that you can, on his frame, when you see Leslie, he looks thin at 245.
We grade him out at an 18.4. You know, death, taxes, and the fact that the Chargers come into the draft in need of defensive help. You can put money on it. They draft defense. Will it finally pay off? Will they finally get out of the doldrums? They have such great individual personnel. They have drafted defense. The one year they had the 3 first-round picks. They went a little bit in that direction. Another defensive pick. They trade up to get O'Neal.
Well, and then their next pick will what? Be offensive lineman? They go back to offensive lineman?
And they still throw 57 passes a game, nonetheless. John Rienstra was the selection with Pittsburgh, the offensive lineman out of Temple. Prior to the draft, we talked to Rienstra about what he felt his individual strengths were coming into the pro ranks.
I think probably the most would be maybe my run blocking from my, because I have from powerlifting and everything I feel I have, powerful hips and everything, and when I get under somebody, I feel that I can most time move them out.
He has done for the Temple Owls. Outstanding foot speed for this young man. Some people say he could be the best pure guard in this draft. The combine scouts were checking their stopwatches and their timing devices because he's 4'7" and 280 pounds. That was kind of your speed at this man can move.
Yeah, 280 pounds. That was my speed.
Yeah.
I like what Howard Balzer said about him, and it's absolutely true. The fact that Rienstra is the kind of guy that inspires other players. He's a hard-nosed kid. He's coachable, except he needs it. But you can take a look at Rienstra. He's just an excellent blocker, and right there you can see he holds well, which is good for the National Football League. He can hold and not get caught.
Hey, there's holding on every play. It's a matter of when the flags go. Rienstra, the number 9 pick overall, Pittsburgh picking him. Then Philadelphia going for Keith Byers. Bengals are up. They've got approximately 13 minutes for their selection. They'll be followed by Detroit. Again, to update you on the other trade, let's get to the podium first.
Between the New York Giants and the Minnesota Vikings. The Giants trade the rights to offensive guard Gary Zimmerman of Oregon to the Vikings in return for 2 second picks. One of them is a pick just acquired today by Minnesota, San Diego's number 2, which is the 17th in the second round. The other second pick the Giants acquired through this trade is the LA Raiders number 2 pick, previously acquired by Minnesota in a trade. That is the 26th selection in the second round. So the Giants trade the rights to Zimmerman for 2 seconds.
Well, the Giants, and of course the draftniks are here. 500 strong our first year in the Marriott Marquis. Gary Zimmerman, who said, I want to play on the West Coast. I want to play in a warm climate. I want to play where I can go out to the beach. He's going to play in Minneapolis. Indoors, but he's going to play in Minneapolis. The rights to Gary Zimmerman out of the USFL.
The Giant fans here love it. Well, at least it sounded like they love it. They haven't thrown anything yet, no. And they're all above us, and so we have to be very kind about them. They get a little drastic sometime here. But you know, 2 number 2 picks. It's a great move for a guy that didn't want to play for you in the first place, and you end up with 2 number 2s.
Bill Parcells said, well, people have been telling me I've got to get equal value. People have been telling me, said the coach, for Zimmerman and for Mark Haynes, who was on the block. He said, when did they give me equal value on the field? Zimmerman's never played for me, and Haynes has never played for me. So again, to update you with that trade, the Draftniks loving this every move. The Giants will have 2 additional selections in the second round. They will pick in the number 17 hole in the second round and the number 26 hole in the second round, in addition to their other selection already, the number 19. So 3 picks in the second round for the Giants. We're waiting on the Bengals. They've got 11 minutes. We'll be back.
He's going to go defense. He's going to install a new defensive scheme, so on and so forth. Why did he select Byers?
Well, he liked the defensive players he saw there. The Eagles were a fairly competent defensive team in need of running backs. Buddy had told me and other people, Anthony Toney, fullback from Texas A&M, who other people didn't rate that highly. Cynics said he's smoke screening and he really wants John L. Williams, running back from Florida. I was hoping Buddy wouldn't lie because he's not a liar type. And so now, never assuming that Byers would be there, he takes a gamble on the guy who could be who could make his career for him, or it could be on injured reserve for a couple of years. I hope the gamble pays off. But it is a gamble, and good for Buddy. I mean, remember Wilbur Marshall, that nobody wanted to go for him because his price was too high, this and that, and Buddy really fought for him, and the guy turned out to be a superstar last year. So I think he knows what he's doing.
He comes from a system, the Bears, where they had a great running back to lead the way, and that was Walter Payton. He wants to go back to the Wilbert Montgomery style of runner to dominate in that backfield, doesn't he?
Well, I think anybody wants a dominating runner. I mean, you saw what it did for Seattle, you saw what it did for the Rams. You get that dominating runner, it changes the whole complexion of everything. These days, I mean, you control the ball, your defense gets more rest, everybody's happy. The linemen are happy, they can drive block a little more. It's good. It's nice and kosher.
Cincinnati Bengals are up next. Bob Lee and Paul McGuire.
George, Keith Byers, the selection, as we said, this could be a futures project. You may very well in Philadelphia have to be prepared, if you're an Eagles fan, to not see Keith Byers play for the Eagles this year. Of course, it very well could be that he will be playing, but he's had problem after problem in the '85 season, Paul. After leading the nation in rushing in 1984, everyone had him penciled in there. Thank gosh it was pencil, not pen, on the Heisman Trophy, #1 man, and continual foot problems during this year.
Yeah, but when you watch him run, and which they're gambling on is that he's going to be healthy, and obviously their doctors feel that way, that Keith Byers, just take a look at the way the man can run. Look at the size of this man. He's got to help anybody, and I guarantee you now that with Philadelphia and putting him in that backfield, tough man to stop, and he's got good hands.
Byers came back from the initial foot problem, then re-injured it in the Minnesota game, but gave us flashes of the '84 Keith Byers. And that really is the yardstick, I guess, that you really have to look at statistically to get a gauge on Keith Byers. 22 touchdowns that season, over nearly 5.5 yards a game. 85, a washout, but a 17.8. The inside, the outside speed, you don't want him to block, but you'd like to see him catch the ball because he can do a nice job with it.
He's a good open field runner. I mean, there's just no question about Keith Byers. If he's healthy, and obviously they feel he is, and he's going to play. And again, I'm saying with a guy like Keith Byers, or any player that has a injury problem before, Bob, when you take a #1 draft choice, that's why I feel that he's going to be ready to play. Maybe not in preseason, but when the season's ready to go.
How big a gamble is it for the Eagles, though? Big one?
No, I don't think. No, again, you go back to what their people are telling them. This man is going to play in 1986, so they feel that his leg's going to come around. He's going to be fine.
They feel the information is good. We are waiting for the Bengals. They are up with approximately 6 minutes to go. As we step aside to this commercial break, let's review what we have seen so far, the top 10 picks in 1986.
baseball, you'll find the footage of the greatest players in the game. And obviously, it's the hope of every club that they'll draft a future pro star when they pick from the college talent pool. Some teams have been able to grab 2 Hall of Famers in a single draft, such as the Bears in 1965 when they drafted Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus. Another team was just as fortunate in 1964. That was when the Washington Redskins hit the drafts version of the Daily Double. You'd have to say the Redskins' 1964 draft was a capital investment. In the first round, they picked Arizona State running back Charlie Taylor. In the second round, they selected Paul Krause from Iowa. In his rookie season, Krause, number 26, intercepted a league-high 12 passes. Krause went on to play 16 years with the Redskins and Minnesota Vikings and retired with 81 interceptions, the most in league history. Taylor, number 42, began the 1964 season as a running back and rushed for enough yards to become NFL Rookie of the Year. But his pass-catching abilities were just too good to ignore. The following year, the Redskins made him a receiver, and for the next 13 seasons, he caught more passes than anyone in football. Taylor left the game with 649 receptions, a record that was finally broken by San Diego's Charlie Joyner in 1984. Until then, the Redskins could claim the distinction of having selected the NFL's all-time leading receiver and all-time interceptor in the same draft.
And of course, the Cincinnati Bengals, they have about a minute 45 to make their minute 46 and holding, so the card is on the way up. Let's check in just a moment to see who the Cincinnati Bengals will take. Remember, they have 2 first-round picks, 6 picks in the first 78 this year. Once again, they have a lot. Here's the commissioner.
Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati selects Joe Kelly, linebacker, University of Washington. Next up, Detroit Lions.
Well, Howard, it's called 20 seconds too late. You got to give me credit, although no one will believe it now. Cincinnati now may open up a whole nother avenue here in the draft because there aren't very many linebackers that are worthy of first-round picks. Some folks think there are not any defensive backs really worthy of first-round picks, although you'll see a couple going. And, of course, with Cincinnati's second first-round pick later, that's another area they have to address. So we're opening up whole new positions here with Joe Kelly of Washington going to the Bengals.
And I think, like you said, with the Bengals having another first-round pick coming up, the Bengals have been a team that has had a history of having a lot of extra picks, but somehow not having them work. A couple of years ago, they had 3 number 1s. Pete Koch was eventually cut. Ricky Hundley, they never could sign and was traded to Denver. But a lot of people thought the Bengals might go for Keith Byers if he was available. Obviously, he was out the window. They're probably looking at a running back, but certainly figure with the type of guys that are still left, Neil Anderson, Gary James, those are just 2 of the names that are still out there. They'll still be able to get a pretty good running back with that other pick coming up a little later. Now we have Detroit on the board. They're a team. Billy Sims looks like his career is over. Wilbert Montgomery is injured. They have to be a team looking long and hard at those good running backs available. And also, who knows, we'll throw out Chuck Long once again, but he's starting to sail, like Christopher Cross said.
Yeah, well, listen, the running backs now, I'll tell you who's smiling down there. It's a team like San Francisco, a couple other teams that might have wanted to move up if the running back started to go. Byers was a wild card. He didn't figure in San Francisco and other teams' selection process. They knew Bo would go first. Now, with Neil Anderson still sitting there and Gary James still sitting there, the Lions will probably take one of those 2. Then with one of those going, then we can expect to see a lot of the running backs. I mean, we thought maybe 6, could have been 8 running backs in the first round. Now, that still could be possible. There's a little bit for everybody. The running back situation is kind of like Baskin-Robbins. Yeah. It depends what flavor you like.
Exactly.
Anderson is rated higher than the rest by some, but not by others.
And you also have the fullbacks like John L. Williams, who rose on a lot of people's lists in the last few weeks. He's still out there. Kenneth Davis is a guy Paul Zimmerman talked about a little earlier. So with the teams coming up now, some of them are teams that you have to think are thinking of running backs. Minnesota will be in, of course, San Diego's second first-round position. They might be thinking that way. That might have been their thinking in terms of making that deal, knowing that with the running back still there, they still have a chance at a good one. San Diego, what they'll do in between, more defense, maybe a linebacker, maybe a guy like Mike Ruth, who's still sitting there, or an offensive lineman like a Doug Williams.
They are waiting now on the first-round pick of the Detroit Lions, who we assume will be a running back. 49ers hope, and Gary James is available when they pick. Let's go to Bob Lee.
Thank you, Chris. Could be a running back, could be the aforementioned Chuck Long, who is beginning to become the interesting commodity of this '86 draft.
Joe Kelly, Cincinnati. Well, last year the Bengals went for linebackers. They went for a linebacker. Joe Kelly again this year. What kind of a system could Joe Kelly fit into? Joe's thoughts.
My biggest asset probably is my speed, because I'm probably not as big as most linebackers, but you know, I weigh about 222. It's not that small, you know, but compared to a lot of other linebackers, it's not that big either. But you know, I think my biggest asset is my overall speed, my quickness, and my ability to cover backs out of the backfield.
Pro scouts agreed, Paul McGuire. This young man has the speed, runs like a safety at 4.66, and works on some strength. He'll be a commodity.
And he hit it on the head when you talk about cover backs out of the backfield. Do you know when you have a linebacker with speed like that, they cover backs out of the backfield, it frees up safeties to help corners out on wide receivers, and that's his greatest asset. This man can cover almost any back coming out.
Well, they didn't cover too many people too well last year. The numbers were well up there, so they can use some help back there. Kelly missed 2.5 games early in this season with some ankle problems. 6'2", 219 pounds, 217 pounds. The numbers on the 1985 campaign, even a 4.61 electronically timed 40-yard time for Joe Kelly. We grade him out on our 20-point system, the variety of categories for linebacker, strength, quickness, pursuit, 4.5 is top grade, as you would imagine, in coverage, 4.3. So a 17.1 number for Joe Kelly. Now, we mentioned last year, Bengals also drafted 4 linebackers. Last year, if you take a look at the depth chart, because they need defensive help, they took Emmanuel King last year, and they also took Carl Zander. And that's the way with Cameron and Winkle and Simpkins also into the picture. That's the picture into which we'll try and place Joe Kelly.
All right, now we're talking about Detroit comes up, and I think you hit it on the head. I think they're going to take a quarterback and not a running back, and I think it's going to be Chuck Long. It's time for him to go in there. Not that far away from Detroit either, is it?
Well, Detroit and San Diego are the next 2 picks up, about just under 10 minutes now. We've had 2 trades today. The trade that was consummated about 15 minutes ago leaves the New York Giants with 3 selections in the second round. Giants worked a deal with Minnesota after Minnesota had worked a deal with San Diego. And right now, Detroit is waiting to make their pick. But there are plenty of Giant fans here. They'll have a lot to, well, cheer, boo, get angry, or get happy about with 3 picks in the second round, plus their first-round pick upcoming. So we are 11 picks into the first round. The Lions are up with very specific needs at quarterback and at running back, glamour positions. And their pick is next.
Sports Illustrated, we're waiting on the Detroit Lions pick. Here's the commissioner.
Detroit Lions' first-round selection is quarterback Chuck Long from Iowa. Next up, San Diego.
All right, you add up the Detroit Lions situation. They have Eric Hipple as their quarterback. He was a 55% quarterback last year, but his interception rate, he had 17 interceptions he threw last year, and that certainly was something that Darryl Rogers did not like.
Detroit was one of the teams seriously trying to trade up for Everett or Long. I don't know who they like better. They might have even liked Long better. And I could just see what's going on in their war room now. They're probably breaking open the champagne. They thought they would never get him in this spot. How did they get so lucky? I mean, they're lining up the hall for the celebration right now.
Are you saying then that very clearly Chuck Long ranked higher than Anderson and James, so they felt they couldn't pass him up at this time, even though they know they need a running back?
Well, look at it this way. You've got 1 running back, 2 running backs drafted. You've got maybe 8 of them left for first-round caliber. They're going to be sitting there in the second round. They're going to get them farther down. There's not going to be a Chuck Long sitting there in the second round. This is the logical move for them. I'll tell you my favorite running back on the whole board, and that's Dalton Hilliard of LSU. The most instinctive runner I've seen in the last 2 years.
San Diego is up next. What direction do they go in? They have already selected defensive end Leslie O'Neal from Oklahoma State.
They go in the direction of James Fitzpatrick, the tackle for SC. They're already calling him and Lachey the Twin Towers.
Fitzpatrick, offense. Right. They want to develop that offensive line once again.
Yeah, they got problems on the offensive line. I mean, a lot of age. You know, they have good players, but they're getting old. The Coryell offense isn't going to work unless you have those big fire-out blockers. Fitzpatrick is really rated highly by the teams that have seen a lot of the West Coast teams. I know the Raiders love him. There are a lot of teams that, just are keeping their fingers crossed. The Redskins love him, but I think San Diego's going to get him.
We're waiting on the San Diego Chargers and their second selection of the first round. They already took Leslie O'Neal. Let's go to Bob Lee and Paul McGuire.
Thank you, George. So,
The speculation, it wasn't a running back, even though Sims may be finished as a running back, maybe a quarterback. And indeed, it was a quarterback, Chuck Long, who came back, could have come out last year, but decided to come back, and with a fifth-year eligibility, used it this year, and had a phenomenal Freedom Bowl, you remember, last season, and came back and just built on that this year. A lot of pressure situations, Paul. He was able to deliver well in the clutch. You can talk about mechanics and numbers, but when they needed a drive late, he was able to put one together.
You watch Chuck Long, and there's one thing about him above other quarterbacks, he'll stay there. He'll sit in there, and he'll wait, and he'll wait, and he'll wait. But, you know, when you get into the pros, they're going to tell him, you know, if it isn't there, get it out of there, because you can't afford to lose a guy like this. I think it's an asset in one respect, but then sometimes, you know, when you've got great linemen rushing you all the time in the National Football League, it could be a liability.
First time since 1968, by the way, that Lions have used a first-round pick for a quarterback. That was the year 68. They took Greg Landry. And part of the, well, not the problem, but the scenario for Long at Iowa, he was not really dealing with major speedsters on the outside. With Detroit, that's not the case. He'll have some legitimate world-class speed on the outside to throw with.
Yeah, this, what Detroit last year got Ferguson away from Buffalo, and or 2 years ago, last year I guess it was. And Joe, there's a question whether he's going to play anymore or not. And it was just obvious that they need a quarterback. And again, it's kind of ironic that he's right over there in Iowa. He's not far away. So it's a good move for Detroit. It's a great move for Long. Now we go back to San Diego. Mr. Zimmerman thinks it's Fitzpatrick. I kind of think they may. It's going to be Fitzpatrick or Doug Williams out of Texas A&M. If it isn't an offensive lineman, it will be Kevin Murphy, the linebacker.
Fitzpatrick would disappoint the Raiders, though.
Oh, as Paul said, he'll disappoint. If they take Fitzpatrick, he's going to disappoint a lot of people.
All right. Chuck Long, another quarterback, gone off the big board. How are commodities doing on the big board, Chris?
We have
a lot of futures.
We have quarterbacks for 60 here. We're playing Jeopardy today, Bobby, actually. We can see that as we look at the board, most of the players who were established as top 10, top 12 players are gone. Casillas and Bo Jackson, Hand and O'Neill, the defensive linemen. Dombrowski, Chuck Long just went. Joswiak, Reenstra, Everett, and Keith Byers. Now, rated number 3 on our board up here, Howard, and he may stay for a while. Mike Ruth, the defensive tackle, nose tackle, really, of Boston College. So he already is a player that must fit a certain team.
Yeah, and I think the thing about Mike Ruth is probably on his pure ability as a nose tackle, he probably deserves that number 3 rating in the draft. But you have to realize he's not a Tony Casillas and the type of guy that Casillas won't come out of the game after first down. If your defense is run well, the nose tackle is a guy who usually only plays on first down. Then you send him out and bring in your pass rushers. Ruth, though, is the prototype nose tackle. His arms are short. He's a great athlete, but he just doesn't fit into that high first-round caliber because of his position, I believe. There's also the fact that he was talking about becoming a priest eventually. He says now he wants to play football. But what's he going to say in 4 or 5 years? Does a team want to invest a high first-round pick in a guy that after a few years might just get tired of the game and say, I'm going to go on with my life's work?
Well, that is a question that has to be addressed. But as we look on the board, Ruth is up there. Of course, Alonzo Johnson is a big name. Now, physically, there's no question he has the skills. He has much heralded off-the-field problems. We may not hear his name called before we go off the air at 4 o'clock Eastern time. Then we go down, and we'll discuss this a little bit later. The big question in the draft now, I think, is when the 3rd quarterback goes. Do they go in the 1st round, or do we go late in the 2nd round? We'll be back with more at the NFL Draft here in New York. And, of course, we are waiting midway through the 1st round, and we'll be back to analyze the picks and more. Stay with us. Quarterbacks gone. Everett and Long. We knew that. Jack Trudeau rated 3rd by most, but far below the first 2. The Illinois quarterback, will he be next? Will Robbie Bosco go? How long will it take?
There's also a guy, Doug Gaynor from Long Beach State, who has started to move up on the draft list. Mike Norseth is also a guy who could sneak in there. Trudeau, to me, is really an intriguing quarterback in this draft. To me, he's the Dan Marino of the 1986 draft. Not to say that he will become as good as Marino, but that he entered his senior season as the top-rated guy, didn't have that good a senior season.
Time out for a second. Here's the commissioner with San Diego's pick.
San Diego Chargers select tackle, Southern California, James Fitzpatrick.
So Fitzpatrick, the big tackle, going to San Diego. So San Diego got what they needed. Defensive pass rush in O'Neal and Fitzpatrick to block for Dan Fouts. So if they can keep him around, they're always going to be a contender. So we'll be back a little bit later here in New York. Right now, let's go out to Los Angeles and Sports Look, where, of course, our colleague Mel Kiper is sitting by with Roy Firestone. Let's jump coast and go out to Sports Look. Gentlemen.
Okay, Chrissy, thank you very much. Mel Kiper along with us. We had selected in advance, I think, somewhat James Fitzpatrick. That's certainly no surprise. In fact, Fitzpatrick is going to be joining us in the studio in just a few moments from out here. Before we talk a little bit about the selection, let's talk about the SC player in general. They seem to grade out very, very well in the pros. Why?
They really do. They come from a balanced attack at USC. They're well coached, and they usually come in with with a lot of accolades because they're usually well recruited out of high school. James Fitzpatrick was a 3-year starter at USC. He didn't have the strength of some of the other players around the country, but he worked to develop that late in his career, particularly as junior and senior. We can touch on that when he gets in the studio. But basically, his pass blocking technique is flawless. He's light on his feet for a 270, 280-pounder.
Very tall, too.
Tall, 6'7", and of course, he's going to be a great pass blocker. And that bookends with Lachey is going to be outstanding, giving Fouts that kind of protection that he needs, because he's got at least about 3 years left out there in San Diego. And of course, they did help their defense with the addition of O'Neal. And Fitzpatrick will move in there at right tackle, taking the place of Sam Clapham, who was a weakness along that line last year.
So many great offensive linemen to come out of SC, Munoz and Powell and Ron Yeri over the years. That really is the home of the offensive linemen. There is a rap, though, against the Southern California players, not necessarily the SC players. Southern California players, I heard actually the baseball manager, Jim Fry, refer to it as California lazy. There's a bad rap. Maybe it's a true rap against California players as not being as motivated as the Eastern players.
Well, there's always that beach kid, street kid mentality, the Pennsylvania kid.
Anything to that, though? Anything to that?
To a certain extent. They're not as strong as they were, I think, and they've developed a better strength program at USC recently. And a lot of those players came into the league maybe with not top strength, but they developed it once they got into the NFL, and they already had the technique and the coaching. So they developed into great players, and I think Fitzpatrick will be an outstanding tackle for the Chargers. Of course, we look down the road as far as this draft is concerned. When we talk about running backs, a lot of the top guys are still there.
Dupart is still there.
Exactly, Dupart, Ronnie Harmon. You go to John L. Williams, the top fullback in this draft, Gary James, Neil Anderson.
Right.
We mentioned Kenneth Davis earlier in the draft, of course. But the teams coming up in that next grouping, we're talking about teams like Seattle, Minnesota, Buffalo. John L. Williams will look nice in a Buffalo uniform because they didn't have fullback problems there, and he needs someone to team with Greg Bell. Of course, Seattle's also interested. San Francisco, Ronnie Harmon's names come up there. The only team in this next group that doesn't necessarily need a running back is Atlanta. Of course, they're looking for a linebacker like, say, a Tim Green, as is Buffalo, and maybe a wide receiver like, say, Givens.
You think the Vikings are going to go, who are selecting next, they're going to go with Kevin Murphy, the outside linebacker?
No, Murphy's dropped. Murphy is dropped because there's some instability in his knee. That's why San Diego wasn't interested at all in Murphy at that point. That's why they went with Fitzpatrick. Of course, at this point, I would think that Seattle's going to look strictly running back or fullback. Minnesota, I think, will look running back also because they didn't expect these guys to be here. Of course, with the depth at that position, Minnesota felt like we trade down, we're guaranteed Neil Anderson, Reggie Dupart are back because none of them had gone yet. So it was a wise move by Minnesota, and they'll probably still get the player they would have taken with the earlier first-round choice.
Sooner or later, we're going to start hearing the jargon. He's a football player. He's an athlete. I want to know when these guys aren't. What are they, shoe salesmen? Well, he's an athlete for us. We think he's a football player. That's a real astute observation from these.
It is true. They're all athletes, just to what degree.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you, Mel. We're going to come back with more live coverage from the NFL headquarters coming up in New York, and updating once again. We'll be talking about the Minnesota selection, Seattle, Buffalo following in just a few seconds. Reporting from Los Angeles, live, Roy Firestone along with Mel Kiper. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Out in January, also missed an all-star game because he had some problems as well. But as we project him ahead, the USC Offensive Player of the Year, knee ligaments against Alabama in the Aloha Bowl. So he missed the Shrine game and he missed the Combine workout. Still, he goes as the number 13 pick.
I like, when you look at his numbers, 15-2 on a total is not
great.
Spectacular, no. But I agree with Paul Zimmerman, the fact that there were a lot of teams down the list. Not up at the beginning of the list, but obviously down the list, that wanted Fitzpatrick. The Redskins, the Raiders. He's a tough kid. He's a tough
USC, that says so much. I mean, he pass blocking par excellence coming out of there, right?
Yeah, and he's as big as a house. I mean, you got.
Here we go again. How big is he?
I'm just saying, he's you know, he's that kind of big guy, and he would fit right into the Raiders deal because of the size. They always have big tackles. It's 6'12" or better. So he's good. He's a good football player. Minnesota coming up, Bobby. I really have no idea what they're going to do.
First, they've got to sign Gary Zimmerman, who wants to play on the West Coast.
Yeah, well, and then Paul kind of thinks defensive lineman, but I kind of think they may go for a running back here. You may see another running back.
Minnesota has just under 6 minutes for their selection. Then it'll be Seattle, then Buffalo. Now, to update you, we've had several trades today. If you're keeping the draft with us at home, as far as the balance of this round, everything is as it was coming into today. Minnesota, that's the pick they acquired earlier today in a trade with San Diego. In the second round, the Giants acquire the number 17 pick, which Minnesota had for about 20 minutes today. So the Giants picked 17th, and they picked 26th in the second round, as well as their existing second-round pick. And in round 3, there's been one trade today, that Minnesota-San Diego trade, with which San Diego moved up and picked Leslie O'Neal. That was the number 8 selection. So in round 3, the number 12 selection, which was belonging to Minnesota, now belongs to San Diego. So you're caught up on all the trades that we've had so far. The one trade yesterday, the Gary Hogeboom trade, the Giants worked that trade as well. So the trading up and trading down that we thought we would see, we have not seen. We have seen, well, Chuck Long, for a minute, Paul, we thought we saw what we call a plummeting pick. We really haven't seen any. The big board shows Mike Ruth up there, but we talked earlier, and Chris and Howard talked earlier about why maybe Mike Ruth isn't going yet. Mike Ruth, who did have the best quote of the year, who was considering entering the priesthood, he said, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're a wimp. Doesn't mean you'll be drafted early either.
And Paul Zimmerman thinks he's the best he's seen. You know, the only surprise of this whole thing is Anthony Bell.
Yeah, off the board.
Off the board. I think that is the only surprise. Everybody else has pretty much fallen in line. And that's not going to really change, I don't think, through the rest of these picks in the first round. And they're only 27.
And we haven't even touched on the economic question. We saw it last year, the flattening out of the monies in the NFL, and now with all the talk that the TV contract will not be what it is now. So that will affect what these people sign for. We are waiting for the pick with 4 minutes to go, and we'll return after this.
Seattle has the next selection.
Gerald Robinson, the defensive end from Auburn, has just been selected by the Minnesota Vikings. Zim, you mentioned you thought they would go defense, and that's exactly the way they went.
Yeah, I could fake it right now and said when I said Gerald Williams, defensive end, I really meant Gerald Robinson, but I won't do it because Paul had jumped me, and I've had enough trouble with him.
Next up, Seattle.
Well, now they can kid themselves and go for a running back, saying, well, you know, so many great ones there. Or they can be realistic, go for the linemen now, which they desperately need. I mean, both tackles problem. Essink was coming off a bad year. Kreider was hurt. You know, they need that big tackle. Chuck Knox, his whole background is offensive line. And then hope that there's a running back in the second round, which there will be. It depends how highly rated these linemen are in their book. I mean, you've got some good offensive linemen that have gone already. The next logical lineman is Doug Williams from Texas A&M, who's a fine drive blocker. Of course, their scheme is a little bit of finesse. You know, they like to move their feet and shield guys and screen them a little bit. I think the logical choice for Seattle would be Doug Williams.
Easley, Green, Warner, they had such great success in the first round. Why?
Because they're smart. I remember I laughed at Jeff Bryant when they picked him. He turned out to be a great player. That might Anthony Bell. You know, we're all laughing at that. Maybe the Cardinals have the courage of their convictions, and they've got a great player there. We all have to Bryant, too.
One of the great things about the draft is that people always have different reactions to selections. Back a few years ago, people had differing reactions to a man named Terry Baker when he was the Heisman Trophy winner. Steve Sable of NFL Films has more.
Being selected the #1 pick isn't always a guarantee of a successful career. For every O.J. Simpson, Terry Bradshaw, and Paul Hornung, there are also mistakes like Rocky Thompson, Bob Ferguson, and Walt Patulski. Perhaps the most famous of these might-have-beens was Terry Baker. In 1962, he was a magazine cover boy and Sports Illustrated's Man of the Year. Few college athletes had ever received so much attention. Few have ever had pro careers that were then so disappointing. In 1962, quarterback Terry Baker was the golden boy of college football. Here, wearing number 11, he broke virtually all the records at Oregon State and led the nation in total offense. He guided the Beavers to the Rose Bowl and won major awards for both athletic and academic excellence. The Los Angeles Rams made him the first pick of the 1963 draft, but Baker's fortunes declined steadily after that. Terry's strength was throwing on the run, and the Rams tried to take advantage of that skill by installing the outpost formation. But the gadget offense didn't work and was quickly scrapped. Terry was then tried at halfback and then flanker with mixed results. You'd be hard-pressed to find more highlights than these. By 1966, he was out of football and in law school. Said Baker's college coach, Tommy Prothro, he was more of an all-around player than a specialist, and there's no place for anybody like that in pro football.
Back in those years, Terry Baker was a favorite player of a lot of people. Who are your favorite players in this draft of 1986? Ones that maybe people haven't been talking about during the course of the last couple of years.
I've got three.
Okay.
One we talked about at great length already, Mike Ruth. Everybody's knocking because his arms are too short. Well, I mean, they reached the other guy's throat. He played the greatest college football game I've ever seen a defensive lineman play, and that was against Brigham Young in the Meadowlands in the opener. Then they say he tailed off. I don't know. If they give him enough rest, dynamite. I love him. Dalton Hilliard, who I talked about before, little fellow, most instinctive runner I've seen in the last 2 years. He's going to be another Joe Delaney in the right office. He's going to be sensational. Third guy is a linebacker from one of the missions, Northern Central, one of those, John Offerdahl. I mean, all he does is stop people. All he does is fill holes, make tackles, knock down passes, plays. I mean, maybe he doesn't run a 4.53 instead of a 4.62. I mean, the scouts can find all these reasons to knock somebody. All he is a great football player. I mean, every time I've seen him play, he's been sensational. And they'll draft him second, third, something like that. Pick somebody with the projected numbers ahead of him. Those are my three favorite players.
We'll be tracking those players as we continue our live and continuous coverage of the 1986 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. Let's go to Bob Lee and Paul McGuire.
Well, thank you, George. We're going to take a look at Minnesota. There are teams in transition here, but Minnesota is in a bit of a transition. Bud Grant came back with a curtain call. Now he's gone. Floyd Peters, defensive coordinator. Jerry Burns, the head coach from within the system. But he's going from a 3-4-4 to a 4-3, and so he's got Gerald Robinson, his selection, well, outside linebacker or a stand-up defensive end.
Well, he's a stand-up defensive end, but, you know, here's a guy that they may be able to put some weight on again. But look at the quickness of Gerald Robinson. I always like when they have a replay of a guy making a tackle after the quarterback had already thrown the ball. But that is intimidation by a defensive end. He's quick. He's the kind of guy like Leslie O'Neal at Oklahoma State. Just
power
quick.
player.
Yeah, he can play. He can fill a hole.
Missed the spring practice back in '84 because he had a shoulder problem. That did not put him back too far. 4.63 speed. Perhaps some more pounds will be put on that frame now that he'll be with the Vikings at 6'4". Gerald Robinson out of Auburn, the number 14 pick. 16.7 the overall grade, and his high grade there, quickness, as evidenced by those highlights. He can get to where he's got to get, and he's got to get there quickly.
Well, you know, Bob, when you have a frame like Gerald Robinson has, and you're 6'4" and he's at 235, 240, to put another, or 250, whatever it is, to put him up to 260, he will not lose that much speed. The training that they go into now, even though they're on the weight programs and the things, the running that they do right along with the weightlifting maintains that speed. And they will not sacrifice weight for speed in his case because he's that quick.
Defenses need speed these days, with the way the attacks are going. I mean, you see more guys coming into the draft and into the pros putting weight on than cases like the refrigerator of people taking weight off.
He took weight off?
Well, rumor has it. Lost a few counties down by DeKalb or something. Seattle with 8 minutes to go. Midway through round one, let's check in with Chris Berman. Chris?
All right, Robert, thank you very much. Seattle, Buffalo, Atlanta. We talked about with Cincinnati, Howard, that maybe there's some different directions are going in the draft. Now, Seattle, we have talked about they could go offensive line running back. But Buffalo, they've got a kid that plays quite close to them at Syracuse named Tim Green. A lot of people say, is he a linebacker? Is he a down lineman? What do you do with him? But Buffalo likes him a lot.
What do you do with him? You find a place for him to play is what you do, because the kid can play, very intelligent, was turned down for a Rhodes Scholarship. He believes it's because he told them he wanted to play football. But Tim Green is an excellent player. Like you said, he's from the area, and he's the type of guy that the Bills have to get in there to upgrade that defense. Their head coach, Hank Bulla, of course, is a defensive-oriented type coach, and so you have to believe that he'll be what they're looking at. But there's a lot of good players still out there, and obviously we've seen a lot of crazy things happen, and but I would say Green would be the logical choice, but of course logic doesn't always enter into things.
Now, when Atlanta comes up, there's no question that they will be thinking with their second first-round pick, having already gone for Tony Casillas with number 2 wide receiver. The word is Ernest Givens from Louisville, a Mark Clayton type receiver, who of course is Louisville too. They liken him to White Shoes Johnson. He's a great return man. Also, wide receiver is a position we have not talked about yet today. You really have 4, barring a surprise, that could easily go in the first round, and they're all different, aren't they? Givens being the smallest of them.
Givens is the smallest, acrobatic. Sometimes you wonder, does the guy move up on the list just because what preceded him? All of a sudden the scouts say, well, Mark Clayton went to Louisville. Does that make Givens a better player? The thing that's also good about
Derek
Givens...
Griffith went to Louisville. What does that mean, right?
They can all jump there, I guess. I don't know. But Givens is the type of guy, he's also a good kick returner. And that adds to his value, because a team that might be thinking, well, he's not going to have an impact right away, he could as a kick returner. Tim McGee, you have to throw in there. Mike Sherrard has run great 40 times in the last couple of weeks. Dallas likes McGee. The Giants like Sherrard. You could start to see some wide receivers fall. If Buffalo passes on Tim Green, though, don't be surprised if the Falcons go for that linebacker help, which they also need, even though they recently traded for Reggie Wilkes, and they could go for a guy like Green if he's there, too.
So the receivers are not really in the same mold. You have different type guys. Sherrard is the fastest, McGee the best all-around. Walter Murray is 6'3", 6'4" type. Receivers could be coming up. Of course, more picks will be coming up here at New York. We will return to more of the NFL
down
draft.
somewhat on that one game.
I don't think so. I think the 4 fumbles and, of course, the drop touchdown pass. Some people say it might have hurt his rating slightly. I don't think so. And, you look at a kid like Harmon, he's versatile. He can even move out to wide receiver. Washington drafted Art Monk a few years back. He was a running back, moved into wide receiver. Teams have done that with success. A guy like Harmon could also switch out there and be a heck of a player in the NFL, as well as running back. So you're getting a player that has dual potential, and they're very valuable to a football team in the NFL, especially with that 45-man roster.
Buffalo's selecting next. Where do you think they're going to go?
Well, Buffalo, of course, they're in a position now where they need an inside linebacker. Jim Haslett's pretty much at the end of his career. Tim Green, they've mentioned back in New York, as a possibility here, and that makes a lot of sense.
He's from that area, too?
He's an excellent inside linebacker prospect, and you can move him around similar to the way that Denver uses Carl Mecklenburg and Miami uses A.J. Dewey. So he'll be able to keep that offense off balance and really help a defense, particularly the Bills, who were very weak in that department last year.
Sooner or later, we're going to be hearing the word who? No one will ever heard of certain players. Those are the dark horses, the unheralded players. I'm going to throw a few names at you. Give me brief summaries of the following players. Players that you like, that you think are going to go high, these so-called who players. Eric Dorsey, Notre Dame.
Well, we touched on him earlier. I think he's an outstanding player, and I would expect him to go. And if Sherrard is gone, as far as the Giants are concerned, I think they should be interested in Dorsey. He's the next best defensive end on the board at that point.
Marcus Koch out of Boise State.
Koch's a fine player. Didn't play football until very late in his high school career, and I think he could be an early second-round choice.
John Washington of Oklahoma State.
Another kid. He's got great tools. In fact, he's bigger than Leslie O'Neal, who was an early first-round pick to San Diego. I think he will also be a second-round selection.
And a guy I know you love, the offensive tackle out of Canada, Mike Shadd out of Queens.
Well, the competition's the factor up there. It's really like Division III in Canada. But he's got all the tools. He's got the Herculean build, great speed, and I think he can go to a team that might want to look 2 to 3 years down the road. Figure with good coaching, a guy like Shadd, 6'4", 285, running under 4'9", can be a player that you can develop. A team like the Raiders, I think he's their kind of player. A big kid who might need 2 or 3 years to work on his technique.
Mel Kiper has spoken. Roy Firestone from Los Angeles Live. We're going to be talking to James Fitzpatrick, an earlier pick from San Diego, just a few moments. But just a reminder, Buffalo, Atlanta, San Francisco on their way. We're going to go back to New York live. Our NFL coverage continues after this.
They're going to have more help now in the person of this young man who didn't get all the ink that his mates got, but can produce.
Yeah, he's a power runner. He's up around 222 to 225. I don't think he can get outside that well, but I mean, as quickly. But his forte is up the middle, and you can see the power of John L. there. And he's an excellent blocker.
Which is important if you're working with Kurt Warner.
I think so, because you're going to be doing a lot of blocking for him. Because there's no secret who's going to be carrying the ball.
Round shot. That's right. He calls the shots. He had a stress fracture, John Williams did. Missed a little bit of time in 1983. Really was not a major factor with the Gators. So over the last 2 years, getting a fix on his 1985, 84 stats, and we grade him out to a 17-0 with his best numbers as a receiver and also inside. Low number as a blocker. Well.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that low number as a blocker. They weren't watching. You look at a thing, Bob, and you don't know what these guys are going to do. I mean, they're projected to be great, and other teams have had the same, similar problems, but they're projected to be great, and by the time they get there, worried about how much money they're going to make and how they're going to spend it, and forget about playing the game of football. And that's been one of the major problems I've seen with these young college players.
As you said, the head case, what goes on upstairs could be 25% of what these pro people, the pro personnel directors, are taking a look at.
I like it.
Regardless of what happened in the chemical test, just where are the heads at? Right now, Buffalo has a decision to make, and they've got 4 minutes to make it. We'll be back.
Selects Ronnie Harmon, running back, Iowa.
Ronnie Harmon.
Ronnie Harmon, running back, Iowa. Atlanta, on a choice from Washington, is now up.
That's Joe Ryan of the National Football League. The selection, Ronnie Harmon, selected by the Buffalo Bills, Paul Zimmerman.
Oh, I'm tired of being wrong. I wanted Buffalo to pick Williams, and I want Atlanta to pick Ernest Givens, and I want the Giants, I want the 49ers to pick Ronnie Harmon like they said they would, and the Giants to pick Sherrard. I'm tired of being stupid. I want to be smart.
Let me ask you two questions. First of all, we have Harmon going now. What does that do to the San Francisco 49ers plan? And secondly, next up is Atlanta. Where do they go?
Well, San Francisco right now, Walsh is telling somebody, I told you we had to trade up to get Ronnie Harmon. You said nobody picked him ahead of us. And the guy said, well, how did I know Buffalo was going to take him? I think the Giants, well, first of all, Atlanta. Dan Henning loves Ernest Givens as a return man. Dynamite little receiver. Rated very highly in one combine, not so high in another. Instant action. Great return man. Dan Henning loves it. None of the receivers have been picked yet. There are combines that rate a lot of them ahead of him. I think Atlanta is going to go for Givens. I think the Giants will go for the blue chip fast receiver, Sherrard. 49ers like Harmon, but don't be surprised now if they turn around and go for Mike Ruth. That was a discussion between Tony Rosano, their scouting director, who loved Ruth, and Bill Walsh, who loved Ronnie Harmon, whose brother Derek plays for him. So don't be surprised if they go for Mike Ruth.
Marion Campbell got the defensive player he wants. He's their new defensive coordinator. What's he doing now to try to argue for another defensive player on the second selection for Atlanta?
Well, you can argue all you want, but Dan Henning's job is on the line. So, I mean, he doesn't want to go for long-range projections. He doesn't want to go for another defensive player. I mean, he's got a mob. He picked defensive ends all over the place. He's going to go to a 3-4. He doesn't need that many of them. He's got good, solid defensive linemen. You get your line in place, things fall into place. You don't have to do that. If you have a guy that you love that'll light up the board, put points on for you, that's the way to go in your second pick.
That's Paul Zimmerman of Sports Illustrated. For those of you just joining us, we are waiting on the Atlanta Falcons' second selection of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. The first round of the draft, as you can see, 12 minutes and change remaining on their selection. They have 15 minutes on the first round to make their picks. Second round will be 10 minutes each, and then rounds 3 through 12 will be 5 minutes each. The Falcons have already taken Tony Casillas, the nose tackle. They are up for their second pick now. Let's go to Bob Lee and Paul McGuire.
All right, George. Well, as we await that pick, you said you didn't care about Joe Cribbs. Who cares about Joe Cribbs? Well, obviously they're trying to move him. Now they've got Harmon, and now maybe a little bit easier to make that trade. Well, is it easier?
Yeah, I think it's easier, but I mean, the problem still comes up, Bobby. Who's
going to take him?
Yeah, who's going to take him? Is his attitude? Does Joe have his head on straight? Is he ready to play? And that's going to be the big deal. There must be a trade in the works, or could be being done now in order for them to take Harmon, because you've got Bell back there. Harmon is not a fullback, that's for sure. At least I don't think he's a fullback. So I was thinking somewhere, but well, again, when you look back, they took an awful lot of offensive linemen last year, young guys that they feel are going to produce this year. Defensive linemen is someplace that I thought that I would go, but when you're 2-14,
well, got to make changes.
Anybody.
Let's get the pick now.
Atlanta, on a choice from Washington, selects Tim Green, linebacker, Syracuse. Tim Green, linebacker, Syracuse.
Syracuse linebacker Tim Green there in the rumblings. The Giants were leaning in that direction. But they go for Tim Green, linebacker. A pick that the Falcons picked up originally from Washington. Let's step back, though, to the Buffalo selection. with now San Francisco up. They've just begun the clock, and then you'll hear the reaction as the Giants will be up. Will we ever hear the reaction? The room may shake with about 500 draftniks here. Ronnie Harmon, running back out of Iowa. Great runner, great receiver, all-purpose player. Let's take a look at him in action. Drafted in the 16th position by Buffalo. Moved to running back as a junior and started the first 2 years. His career, not starting in the lineup, but began his career as a wide receiver. So this guy has the entire package.
He does have the entire package, and that's the job when they got Cribbs back. We'll go back to Joe Cribbs for a moment, because Joe had, when he played for Birmingham in the USFL, had, really, and in Buffalo, had great hands. He's good coming out of the backfield, and it just means the trade has got to be there somewhere along the line because of Ronnie Harmon's gift as a receiver and a runner.
4.54 speed, 22 touchdowns on his career. You wouldn't like to be reminded about the Rose Bowl. He did not have a great day that day, but that is not one game upon which to judge an opinion of what he has done. 10 touchdowns. You see the receiving numbers, which are just as impressive as the rushing numbers. This guy can stop on a dime, reverse his field. He's a real offensive threat.
Yeah, he is. It's 16.7. Blocking is his lowest, but with that kind of speed, his running ability, and the great hands he has, they can develop a little bit of blocking if they have to.
Okay, so Harmon, maybe not the total answer, but part of the answer in the backcourt, or I should say, I'm still in Dallas at the Final Four, the backfield for the Buffalo Bills. Atlanta has gone for Tim Green, which may, George, have meant some reshuffling with the Giants. I'm sorry, backcourt, backfield. It was close. They don't dribble this one, do they? It's shaped differently.
And the Swamp Fox got his
that's not Dick Vitale next to you, I'll tell you.
Oh, I know, believe me.
We are waiting on the San Francisco 49ers and their selection. When you look at the selection process, you can sometimes group it in divisions. Let's take a look at the NFC Western Division with Chris Berman on how they have fared in recent years with the draft.
Fans whose favorite teams compete in the NFC West might sum up the division by looking back to those sages, the four tops. It's the same old song. The common denominator, success for the Niners and the Rams, failure for the Falcons and the Saints. The Niners and the Rams have won 4 of the 5 divisional titles in the 80s, the only exception being when Atlanta won it in 1980. And, of course, New Orleans has never even had a winning season. While Bum Phillips was trading away a pair of #1 picks for the likes of Earl Campbell and Richard Todd, or dealing George Rogers to the Redskins only to choose Alvin Tolles in the opening round a year ago, Bill Walsh and John Robinson were wheeling and dealing their way into the playoffs for the last 3 years. Robinson talks about his wide receiver choice, Ron Brown.
I think it was a deal that was put together properly. Ron gives us an opportunity to have great speed at wide receiver. People think of him as a sprinter, but he's a man that's played football all his life, so he's a football sprinter. He's more in the mold of a Cliff Branch or a Mel Gray coming out of college that had played both.
On a choice obtained in a previous trade with New England Patriots, select 16th pick in the first round. Wide receiver, Jerry Rice, Mississippi Valley.
Looking back on it, I think Bill Walsh must have had a pretty good indication, because I think he gets along with Mackovic pretty well, and he probably was wired to that pick, and he knew they'd take Horton, and maybe Rice wasn't that much of a gamble. But I really salute him for doing what he did, making that strategic move when he saw the wide receivers were available. He moved quickly and got one of them, and he probably thought he really had to give up a lot more than what he did to get that good receiver.
Well, it worked out well for us, and I'm sure for New England. We all have our needs. In our particular case, we haven't drafted a wide receiver for a long, long time. We have some excellent players at that position, no question about it. But this adds some competitive nature to the thing. We know Jerry Rice is a great one, and